We're going to begin our next session. The next session is going to dwell into the potential for startups and entrepreneurs in the Indian and American markets. May I request all the panelists and the moderator to please come up on stage. Mr. Arun Kumar from Celesta Capital, Mr. Raghav Handa from HSBC, Mr. Rahul Seth, Mr. Krishna Penamakuru from Dhruva Space, Mr. Praveen from Accenture, and Krati Hashwani from Trilegal. Could I request everybody to please come on stage? Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Hi. I think we're going to start with this. Anybody else who can join in after their lunch? Hi, I'm Krati, and I'm going to be your moderator for today. And we have a very esteemed and knowledgeable panel amongst us today to be discussing the kind of prospects that we have for the space, startups, and ecosystem in India. I myself am a lawyer, so I'm going to be moderating this session from the lens of the kind of regulatory, the kind of liberalization that this industry has seen lately. There's been privatization, there's been a lot of, liberalization in terms of the foreign direct investment that could previously happen in this sector. So before we dive into the session, I'm going to sort of lay out a brief outline of how this panel is going to play out. We have professionals from various sides of the spectrum who would be weighing in their inputs and knowledge on the kind of things that we plan to achieve here, right? So we have Mr. Arun, Mr. Raghav, Mr. Rahul, Tejas, Krishna, and Mr. Praveen, who all are going to be sort of helping us understand what kind of opportunities lie in this sector, and what are the challenges that we can all sort of put our heads together and sort of discuss the things that we see this industry going towards. To start off, Mr. Arun, I think I'm going to take a couple of more minutes to introduce everybody so that we have a bit of more background as to where we're going with this. Mr. Arun is the managing captain at Celesta Capital, who's also been heavily involved in the diplomatic relations between India and US. So he'll be sort of weighing in with his inputs when it comes to how, as two countries, where we can sort of come together to achieve certain things here. Mr. Raghav is the Director of Strategic Business and Development and Government Affairs at HSBC. He has a wealth of knowledge when it comes to certain regulatory problems that, going forward startups could be facing, or challenges that they're already looking at in terms of how can they go about now sort of financing themselves and sort of looking at a global bank, learning from their sort of experience into how they can now, sort of kickstart business in India. We have Mr. Rahul, who has a lot of, who is a part of this evolving industry and a very nascent ecosystem when it comes to space and technology, with his inputs on how, what kind of challenges has he seen the industry face, and the sort of, like from the lens of somebody investing in such companies. We have Mr. Krishna, who is the CEO at Dhruva Space, which is one of the leading startups when it comes to the aerospace and defense sector, and they're the ones like leading by example. We have Mr. Praveen, who is the lead industry solutions for Space Tech Accenture, who will help us understand the kind of sort of challenges when it comes to client engagement and how Accenture can sort of promote startups and MSMEs and other companies in this sector. So off to you guys. If I could, I would like Mr. Arun, if you could please give us your inputs into how you see, with your experience when it comes to deep tech and when it comes to the relationships between these two countries, where do you see the most prevalent the most promising prospects when it comes to this sector. Yeah.
No, thank you, thank you. It's great to be here. And I'm reminded of a situation where we've had such great discussions this morning that all the important points we made have been already made, but not everybody here has made all the important points. So in that spirit, let me take on a few points. First of all, as was mentioned, I used to serve in the US government. I joined the Obama administration in 2014, and it was around that time that Prime Minister Modi got elected. And in fact, that was a time when there was a change in the slope of the US-India engagement, starting around 2014, following the then new Prime Minister. And I was involved in a number of conversations between the two governments. And it's really wonderful to see where the relationship stands today. I don't think anybody in April or May 2014 would have predicted that the engagement would be so broad and so intense and so trusting. This is a really important thing to bear in mind. And this actually means a lot of mutual opportunity for both countries, for business people in both countries. If I might also get personal, today there were some references to the first rocket launch in India, which was from Tumba. It was a Nike Apache, a small rocket, maybe this size, a really small rocket that was launched. It trailed sodium vapor, which means the entire sky got lit up in a certain orange color. And I was a kid then, I remember that. And in fact, personally, when the space became magical to me, starting from that moment. A little side is that the next day was the day that President Kennedy was assassinated. So the big news of the rocket launch was in a way obfuscated by the sad news of the Kennedy shooting. A few years later, in 1969, Neil Armstrong landed, as you know, on the moon. And literally a few months later, and I grew up in Trivandrum, a piece of the moon rock was brought to Trivandrum. And I remember being so excited to stand in a line and look at this piece of rock sitting in a little glass cube. So from those early days, see how far we've come. We're talking about India landing a person on the moon. India has already landed successfully on the other side of the moon just a few months ago. So it's really very, very uplifting to see what's been going on both in the whole area of space and what India is doing and what India is doing with the US, as well as separately on the US-India relationship. Now, to your question, what's the area of opportunity? I think this has been touched upon quite a bit in terms of technology. Probably the most important engagement between the US and India today at the policy level is what's called ISET, the Initiative on Critical and Emerging Technologies. And it's a very natural area for the two countries to collaborate because the talent that there is in India has a lot to contribute, and if you bring the US and India together, it will just advance the envelope of what can be achieved so much further. So the title of today's session here is Opportunities. I mean, the opportunities are vast. And I would just point to a few points. One is talent. The talent that we have right here in Bangalore and around India is going to be a major driving factor. And talent is going to be the limiting factor to what can be achieved. So the more talent that can be generated and trained, the more India can achieve along with the US. The second is, and this was referred to, I think, by Dr. Somnath and others, the Indian market itself is going to be very, very large. You know, agriculture, insurance, you name it, IoT. It's going to be a very large market, and that itself is going to be a huge test bed for Indian space companies. Third, there is a shortage of capacity, launch capacity, and space capacity the world over, and India can cost-effectively step into that area and exploit those opportunities. So in my role as a partner at Celesta Capital, really excited to be playing in the space area. We have an investment in Agnikul, and we are excited about the team and what they can achieve, and that's only the start of what we expect to do in the space. When I step back and look at India, India has been successfully following what the US has done. You know, Dr. Somnath mentioned how NASA decided to vacate certain areas and leave that to the private sector. Well, India is on the cusp of doing that. I think India has been very far-reaching in terms of in space and the whole regulatory and promotional policies that are being brought to bear to the space sector. And I mean, this government has to be really complimented, and the US government has to be complimented for working together in terms of pursuing opportunities in the area of space. Space, by the way, is an area where there's been a history of international collaboration. I mean, think about the International Space Station. Two countries that have all kinds of issues with each other can collaborate. I think if that can be done between those two countries, certainly the US and India can do a lot more.
Thank you, Mr. Arun. That was all very like to hear how we started with, the smallest rocket, and now we're talking about the sort of collaboration between the countries that we're now looking at. An interesting segue from what Mr. Arun just said. Mr. Rahul, if I may get your thoughts on how you think being an investor in both markets, is there any, and especially in the defense and aero space, are there any challenges that are there any challenges that you think comes with such a capital-intensive system, like an ecosystem, which requires, like as Mr. Arun mentioned, there's so many opportunities that are here, but at the end of the day, it requires money, it requires investments, it requires financing. So are there any, sort of key challenges that you see when it comes to investing in startups and companies in this sector, and how they could probably learn or how to go about this?
Okay, that's a lot of questions, and I thought this was commercial space, but let's do a little bit of dev space as well, if that's of interest. So one, in terms of opportunities when founders look at it, right? On a macro level, I don't think it's just necessarily a sector or a thing you need to talk about. It's more a thematic thing. I think indigenization as a broad theme is a very, very big characteristic. It's one of the things that we're looking for within the space ecosystem as well. And once you start diving deeper into it, it goes into everything. So we need ASICs, we need radar systems, we need avionics, we need control systems, we need ECUs, we need BLDCs, we need FADACs, we need all of these things. And as you go deeper into each one of these, you will identify smaller and smaller components that you need to make. So for example, for radars, MMICs. DRDO has apparently created one. I think there's some thought around TOT around it. But it's still one of those things that we import from the US, for example. We import from other areas. So that's one very good theme to look at. Ki yaar, ye export kar rahe. Like all of this is stuff that we have to import, make it out. So that's one in terms of problem statements and how to think about it. In terms of capital, I think the landscape has changed significantly over the last 5-6 years. So I started looking at space for the first time back in 2018, I think, back when we had 4 or 5 companies. Dhruva was one of them. And come to today, the capital requirements have shifted to a different stage. So at that point of time, getting the initial capital to start up was just not available. Today, there is more than enough capital to start up and get started, get a prototype in place. The chasm now is at the next stage. So generally, if you think of it in terms of financing, and founders here would attest to it, there's a lot of capital available for sub $1 million investments that you require. And there's a fair bit of capital available once you're above $7-8 million of requirement as well. It's that middle valley of death where most companies end up floundering and figuring out कि अब क्या किया जाए. And there are 2 strategies to it. Like the old school way of thinking about startups doesn't work here. You can't think of, oh, I'm going to burn a lot of capital to get to some point in place and then something will happen as a result of that. It doesn't work that way. It's fairly binary. And what I mean by binary, one of the biggest things you end up looking at for a space company, for example, once they've received some capital, is have they managed to build some sort of space heritage? And which is where structurally within this sector, there is a gap of like the $2 to $5 million checks, if you think about it. The second issue outside of capital is actually an issue of demand. And this is something I've spoken about at enough forums over the last 3-4 years, where there is a lack of certainty of demand. Once there is certainty of demand, there is lack of clarity on timelines for procurement. Then there is lack of clarity on payment for that procurement as well. And it's these three things that need to be solved. So, for example, payment for the procurement is something that maybe HSBC can fundamentally solve, say through invoice discounting when that happens. But I think Dhruva will have a lot of examples about how long these cycles end up taking. And the shorter these cycles become, the better it is for the ecosystem to be able to grow. Now, there are lots of reasons. There are vested interests, there's bureaucracy, there are many reasons why this doesn't work. But you have to be a fundamental optimist and hope that this works in many ways. The other thing that I said in the beginning for founders, and I'm sorry, I'm giving you 4 or 5 different answers for all your questions, is you got to pick a niche and then expand from it. So I will quote the Dhruva example here. I think if I remember correctly, you guys, solar panels was the niche you guys went into, and then said, okay, we'll do integration, we'll do 4 or 5 other things as such. With Manastu, for example, who's in the audience, they started with clean fuels fundamentally. With Digantra, who's in the audience as well, they said, we'll first start just with the data that's available about satellites to give you visualization, then we'll do that. So every company that you see going the mile in this space starts with a very, very narrow focus where they feel that they have a very clear right to win and expands upon that. And that's generally the way to go. Now, the days of, like, there are a lot of investors who say, we don't know if India needs a 3rd launch company or a 4th launch company. I honestly don't have the answer either for this. The answer comes from founders. They decide they want to build it out. Just a few days ago, I was talking to some students who were like, we'll build in-orbit relays for data transfer. Good stuff. I have no idea. And we learn from the founders itself. So the idea is go niche. If there is policy recommendations to anybody in the audience, please try and solve for that chasm. The $2 to $5 million checks are the hardest for people to get. So the easier it is that can happen, the better. Please solve for greater transparency with procurement processes, MOQs, and most importantly, timelines. Because startups, unlike large conglomerates, work on momentum. A large conglomerate can afford to wait for 5 years before something happens. A startup dies in 2 years. It's as simple as that. It gets food or it doesn't. And I think that's the critical thing, or in some ways the critical message that I would like to pass on to anybody in the ecosystem. This is also for large primes in the ecosystem, by the way, who should play their part in many ways in supporting these companies. I know a lot of primes think of early companies that are coming out as competition, but the idea is that this is how you will end up having a robust ecosystem. This is how you will end up having your suppliers. This is how you'll end up having good quality OEMs. This is how you will reduce your dependence on exports. This is how you will fundamentally improve your bottom line, not by competing with these companies, but actually by enabling them. Like, take a hit today so that you have robuster supply chains going forward. And I think resiliency is a theme that larger primes ought to think about fundamentally as well. But I will stop now, sorry.
Thank you so much for taking up all of my questions and answering them in such detail. I think it was very helpful for me and everybody on the panel and everybody in the audience to sort of get this insight. Rahul, you mentioned lack of clarity when it comes to certain certain things when it comes to the startup ecosystem and how negatively it can impact, especially this ecosystem. So my next question would be for you in terms of Mr. Raghav. To understand when we discuss lack of clarity and something that could potentially impact the startup ecosystem way adversely than other things. Is there anything when it comes to, like, this is from an investing perspective, but when it comes from a financing perspective, from when it comes to seeing banks such as HSBC being very invested into how to finance such ecosystems, and when it comes to even sort of helping with the lack of clarity, say, that could come from a regulatory perspective. Before we had the panel, we were just discussing how now that the foreign investment norms have been liberalized, despite the liberalization, we've now, coming from how it used to be for the last 20 years, we've now opened up the sector to a lot of different categories. Is there any are there any questions you face from startup investors and startup founders who are like looking to get in this money, and maybe that that lack of clarity when it comes to the regulatory sector could also hamper getting these funds in. Is there anything that you'd like to?
No, sure. First of all, thank you so much for having me here. I think there are two parts to your question, right? So one is on how do you really fuel the growth, right? There's a lot of VC, capital coming in. The number of startups have grown over the last, 10 years from probably, I think, 1 in 2012 to about 200. I think we saw those numbers in the morning. There is a fair degree of VC, capital that is flowing in. I think where a bank like us is playing a role is trying to fuel or maybe create platforms for growth of such startups. And that's not only limited to startups, but Indian SMEs and MSMEs as well. The reason I specifically focus on these three, because they are large anchors out in the room who've got pretty much fair access to capital. They've got a large team to help them with the various pieces around regulatory navigation and so on and so forth. So I'll break this down into two parts. One is, I think the structures that work out in terms of financing for an early stage sector such as space. It's an early stage sector, but it is at the same time quite promising as well. And the other is really from a FEMA perspective, right? Because RBI does come on very heavy, and we've seen startups getting slapped with fines just because of one simple FEMA, violation, and getting slapped with fines up to 25, 30, 50 lakhs, 1 crore as well. Now, this is not only a monetary issue, but this is more of a blacklisting issue as well, where you do get in the eyes of the regulator as a defaulter and maybe a potential defaulter as well. Now, I think most of the founders are in the room, probably very rightly are focused on growth, which is probably the right thing, and hence it is really probably on their banking partners, whether it's HSBC or it's probably the other set of banks here, to ensure that they give you the right set of information and knowledge to help you navigate through this very complex regulatory FDI, FEMA, regime. So to kind of take up the first one in terms of financing, see, we are roughly a $35 billion balance sheet in India, which makes us the largest international bank by balance sheet here. Now, what we did a few years back was to set up a dedicated startup funding pool, which was roughly for about $250 million. This has kind of almost got exhausted. We are in the process of adding on to this. This startup funding pool, and I think Rahul, this is to your point of how do you kind of plug in that gap of $2 to $5 million, whether it's whether it's an equity check or there's a financing partner who kind of steps in and ensures that this is low cost financing that is available. So it's not financing at 15-16% what you find through private financiers, but it is probably financing at a competitive rates. So it is through this dedicated startup pool. Obviously, this is not funding for ideation. It is funding where you got a live product. Whether it's early stage or it is Series B and beyond, as Rahul very rightly mentioned, beyond Series B and beyond, once you are into that 15, probably like 7, 10, $15 million bracket, you don't really find much of an issue. The issue is that how do you fund that initial phase? So I think that's one way that we've been doing it. The other more sustainable way, because startup financing is again going to be quite selective. It's going to follow an independent credit assessment process. But what's more frequent and what's going to be more probably useful for this audience is this entire vendor finance structure that we have. So for example, you may be a supplier to a large anchor. It could probably be an NSIL. It could be ISRO and so on. So if you are vendors or maybe component providers to large anchors, there are very simple and vanilla structures in place, such as purchase order-based financing, purchase order-based discounting. You just need to be a supplier to a large credible anchor, and that makes it a lot easier for a financing institution to step in and kind of help you with that initial level of leverage that you're kind of looking at. The third piece is really around aiding a globality, right? What's my single piece of strength here? My single piece of strength is my globality, right? So whether you're a startup in India looking, to participate in the US, looking to participate in Europe, looking to participate in Australia, you essentially deal through one single bank, and you have a strong home relationship. When you kind of expand to these other markets, you would relatively be smaller, but that really should not be a worry as long as you have a strong home relationship with us in India. Such financing structures can easily be put in place. The fourth thing that I would really mention is we continue to leverage a large private equity and a VC equity ecosystem that we have. So introduction to, probably like potential investors. There is a proper investment banking division that kind of does this. That's something which is on the offer. Do please feel to kind of raise your hand for that. The other piece around FEMA, right? I think this has come in more, I think three very typical questions that kind of come to us since the time there's been a liberalization of the new FDI norms. There were quite a few sectors which in the earlier telecom bill were 100% automatic. There have been questions that now there's a new FDI policy specifically for this sector. Does, the telecom bill override it? And there were applications, for example, earlier on, which were kind of allowed 100% as automatic, and now it's probably in the 49% bracket or 74% bracket. Do we need to, do we really need to, say like go back and have, filings for like good order's sake? Our single piece of advice there, and what we've seen in cases, that if you do get in such, if you do have such, structures in place, and if you do kind of encounter this, it is always better to go to DPIIT and seek those approvals for, being in good order. The second thing that we've really seen is that, for example, shares have been issued probably an X million dollars of valuation. You are going into a bonus share round, you're going into a fresh issue, and if your valuation is kind of now coming down, please bear in mind that you need to intimate RBI. This is not under the automatic route. We've seen at least 7 to 10 startups just going blindly and kind of raising this and issuing shares. They have been slapped with fines in the bracket that I've just told you, right? So this is not under the automatic route. And when I say it's not under the automatic route, there is a prior intimation to RBI that is indeed required, right? And your AD bank, we've been doing this for quite a few cases, that can be done. The third is normal, regulatory kind of infusions, your FCGPR intimations, FCTRS intimations. This again is to be done in a very time-bound manner. Like lawyers and consultants like TriLegal do this fairly well. But yes, you need an AD bank as well to work with you as well as your lawyers. Do not please take this, while your CAs and CFOs would probably, do this for you, but this seems to be a simple process, but it comes in with a very, very serious implication if not done properly. I'm not trying to scare you here, but these are live cases that we've seen. Post management with RBI is not that easy, right? The regulator sees it with a lenient lens. You will get compounded. Those compoundings get cleared. But then the first question is that if you've got the right partner, the right AD bank, why in the first place should you really get compounded, right? So I'll take a pause there, but these two are broad areas, both on financing, as well as on FEMA, observations that you should probably keep in mind. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think just short of scaring everybody, I think we really cleared quite a lot of questions that were around the regulatory hurdles that might come in, and how you should probably just always work with a partner bank who's willing to put your best foot forward when it comes to approaching the RBI. I'm so sorry, I was relying on the names behind us, but yeah, Mr. Krishna. Being one of the, I think Rahul just mentioned, like being one of the first few startups, maybe when we talk about the startups that first came up when the space sector in India started growing, right? I think Dhruva was one of the first few names when it comes to mind. Are there any things that now that we've opened the panel to discussing things that you should, the way in which you should proceed, are there any learnings in your experience that you faced, having been one of the first few startups, that maybe startups who are planning to now go on about expanding their business should keep in mind? Any things to avoid when it comes to expanding their business now that the government is supportive of it?
Thank you for this opportunity. First of all, I'm very happy to be here. I think bottom line for any startup or any company which is doing business, three things come into picture. One is technology, second is finance, third is regulatory, which is equally important. Technology thing is usually sorted at the start. When a company decides to start up, they know what product they are building. They have the technology, they start building. But in space, it's a bit different. You don't get to do your alpha testing, beta testing, etc. in your technologies. Once the satellite is launched, it's launched. So that's a big factor you should consider and change your processes while you're approaching a product development model. It's a fine print. The difference between the 99% successful and the 100% successful is what that space industry comes down to. And that's first part, technology. Then coming to the funding scene, when we started looking for funds first in 2018, people were just aware of space sector, but not completely aware of what is the regulation. And there was, I don't think by then there was any private company in India who owned a satellite. All the satellites were owned by government of India. So it was a tough calls we had to make. We were meeting some hundreds of investors, and luckily we found some people who we struck resonance with, and they have trusted in us and funded us, and that's where we began. But the funding is not the first seed fund you get is really not good enough for actually launching and owning a satellite or do anything serious with it. So what we could do was only build prototype. But the problem is with prototype, again, we are running behind investors. So we had to adapt. So the first meeting founders which we had was, let's be prepared. Let's not lock onto the vision and mission on day one and lock everything and let's not put all the things in one basket and be ready to adapt, especially since the regulatory process were not built in yet. That was the first decision which we have taken, and even till today, we stick by that. We are still adapting, we are ready to adapt to any changes, and we are not locking ourselves because it's still evolving. So what we did was we went with a customer-centric model. So first time when we got our funding, we got our customer even before we built a product. That was our focus, that to eliminate the risks. So these are the things which you have to focus on in the funding side of things. It's just not like you get money, you just don't spend it out and say, hey, there is something, I need more money. That's how usually most of the startup ends up with. And that's actually a good formula to fail. And finally, coming to the regulatory side of things, back in 2018, there was not much regulatory. There was no regulatory for a private company to own a satellite, to launch a satellite. There was nothing specific then. Thankfully, IN-SPACe was formed very aggressively in 2020-21 time frame. They have been phenomenal in supporting us because the first time we launched our satellites, Thibault 1, Thibault 2, that was the first time IN-SPACe was also going through all the features. They were supporting us, and they were also learning and how to go out with us. And honestly, they themselves are like a startup, so they were helping us throughout how to hold, how to launch, throughout the process, so that helped us. And right now we are standing on a situation where the policy is drafted, we have a procedures. Recently even an NGP document was released by again IN-SPACe, which talks about how to approach people, how to go about things. So everything is much more clearer right now. So people who are starting up now, you have to focus more on the technology and innovation because regulatory side of things are going in the right direction.
Thank you, Krishna. That was indeed very helpful. I think moving towards a more optimistic side of the discussion, now that we're past the regulatory hurdles that we were sort of discussing, and it's good to know that, you know, something that you probably, when you came on board and the kind of challenges that you faced all of these years later now, it's somehow those things have now they're in a better shape. So now companies can actually focus on innovation and technology and sort of give it their all when it comes to developing those things. Mr. Praveen, I wanted to understand, you know, if while we're at this discussion where what things could startups avoid, since you deal with the client side of things in terms of engagements that you probably oversee, and you know, to deal with both of these sides, which is startups on one side and client engagements on one side, are there any takeaways when it comes to how, if technology and innovation and developing your prototype and things like that are already taken care of, how can then startups and companies in this sector go and sort of engage with clients with your help?
Thank you, Krati, for asking that question. So, whenever I talk to clients, right, I lead the industry solutions. We support more than a dozen odd industries. It could be your mining, energy, oil and gas, government, medical, and so on and so forth. We try to solve their business problems. It could be an oil and gas company saying that I would like to monitor my methane emissions. can you help us? And yes, that's how we position the satellite imagery. Likewise, we try to look at innovating at scale to see how we could use the satellite imagery, and it could be SATCOMs, any of these solutions, in conjunction with a lot of other technologies like AI, ML, data analytics, and so on. Now, how we do it, that is where we try to bring in on our partnership strength with the startups. There are certain things where we consciously want to build in-house in terms of predictivity models, the cloud and data foundations, and there are certain things which we consciously would like to tap into the startup ecosystem so that it gives us scale in terms of innovation. And through our own ventures, we do have partnership with several, we stay invested with, we had investment in Cosmos, Pixel, and of course we have teaming agreement with a lot of space techs, including Dhruva Space, Tatyarth, and all. And what I keep telling every time I talk to some of the startups, when we are in a client meeting or a POC, the gestation period is high. When I tell my client, for example, there's yet another customer who wants to measure carbon sequestration for the mangrove forest he's trying to plant, they would want to know how it really works. It starts with a small POC and then followed up with some questions. And when we do a POC, the next stage is, hey, do you really have the ground truths? The customer would most often not willing to share the actual latitude, longitude coordinates. There is good amount of 2-1-4 which happens. It's actually a kind of a marathon. And it's very important that the startups also have, in terms, the scalability will become a limitation. And of course, the whole energy to sustain the longer client conversation is another equally important thing to look out for. And I think while Accenture brings in a lot of focus in terms of the talent, in terms of supporting the startup itself, that's where probably it could be the governments or it could be the VCs who could also help in so that because once you do a MVP, then it's all full scalable. It's all about doing it for multiple locations, geographies, and so on. So just to reiterate, it's the startups will need to anticipate that it's not going to be a sprint. It's going to be a long, drawn journey, and patience is key. And anticipate things which you may not necessarily get in terms of client data, and accordingly plan the journey.
Thank you, Praveen. I think we have another 5 minutes left for this panel to wind up. We'll probably leave the last couple of minutes for any Q&As that anybody might have. But an important segue, I think, when it comes to now discussing this at a scale where USIBC has organized this, Mr. Arun and Mr. Rahul, if there is any insights that you would have in terms of how startup ecosystems are different when it comes to both US and India, and not a broad-ended question again, but just in terms of how, like you said, something as simple as how at a prototype stage, many investors may not be willing to invest, but that's also what a startup can do. So just in terms of anything that you would like to see change when it comes to this sector, and what could be the possible learnings from other developed ecosystems?
If I were to offer some thoughts, the big difference I see between the space ecosystem entrepreneurially in India and the US is that here much smaller teams are able to take on initiatives with smaller amounts of capital. If you think about the US space ventures, they're all highly capitalized, big, highly visible projects. Here, partly due to the very supportive nature of ISRO, I think that's a big part of it. NASA, by comparison, with all due respect, NASA people in the room, is a huge bureaucratic behemoth to engage with. I think ISRO is much easier. I think that's a big difference. I mean, in a way, India is taking an approach of frugal entrepreneurship in the space area, which is very, very interesting.
Check. The simplest answer is there's magnitude orders of more money available in the US. It's as simple as that. The timelines are shorter. The VCs, and I'm one in the Indian ecosystem, so I will admit it very freely, understand a lot more in the US about this ecosystem. They have a lot more visibility about what returns will look like. They're able to go deeper into the ecosystem as a result of it. And that entire overall capital pool fundamentally changes things. Like I think there was just very recently a $40 million project that got awarded to a company, a startup, which has not demonstrated space heritage, none of those things, just for in-orbit servicing. That just happened 2-3 days ago as such. We can't anticipate something like that in India. In fact, in India, and pardon me for whoever is going to take umbrage to this, is you will not get money even after you've demonstrated it. And it's a problem. I will say it on behalf of startups because they don't want to annoy people in the ecosystem because it comes back for them. But literally, that's one of the biggest problems. I think bureaucracies exist everywhere. I'm not going to claim, because I've not dealt too much with the American bureaucracy, that bureaucracy is better anywhere. I think it's the fundamental nature of bureaucracy. But just in terms of capital, willingness to go faster, etc., a lot of that is far more easily available in the US. What's good in India, very interestingly, is, I would say, as we say, the saving grace of in India in so many ways is the people. It's the talent pool that's willing to work for peanuts for years on end with no outcome in sight to go at it. Like the mission-driven nature of things, the way it gets done here is incredible. And I think that's our biggest asset that we have. The problem though is, I hope that that mission-driven nature is not abused to an extent where you're like, आप पैसे के बिना भी करते रहो, आप पैसे के बिना भी करते रहो, which isn't eventually going to lead to a robust or a resilient ecosystem in many ways. And I think that's changing, and I hope it changes. Like the point of pointing this out today is so that that changes faster. It's not directionally, I know it's improving. It's the rate of improvement that is a question in so many ways. The second I've already pointed out, that capital chasm in the middle that we have is not something companies in the US have to face. They can, there are equal parallels to companies. There's a company called True Anomaly in the US. They do something very similar to what Digantra does here. With lesser milestones, they've been able to raise $100 million. Digantra has managed to raise $12 million, which also is an outlier in the Indian ecosystem if you think about it. So it's just a function of capital in so many ways. I think, and this I will do chest thumping on, I think our talent is better. I think it works harder. It's willing to go to ends that nobody else is willing to go to. We're fundamentally constrained by capital, and I think that's one of the things I'm trying to solve for as well by specifically focusing on this sector, investing in this sector. I think the second thing that's very different is we've just started to have our first set of heroes in this ecosystem. And I think that's very, very important for younger companies to be able to have companies to look up to and say, hey, they've done it. And which is why I say this to pretty much every founder in the ecosystem today, that nobody is competing with anybody. All of you are setting the path for it. That even though I don't have an investment in Agnikul, for example, I am dearly hoping and praying for their launch to happen as quickly as possible. I'm hoping for Skyroot to succeed. I'm hoping for Galaxy to succeed, for Pixel to succeed, for Manastu to succeed. Because these people will become the heroes of the next generation of founders who will come. And we still don't have too many of those. We have a few that people are able to look up to, but we need at least 10x more of those to come about. And this is where my appeal to the primes in the audience as well. It goes back to my favorite founder/entrepreneur, which is Akio Morita of Sony. And one of the things when he talked about, and it's something I've held very close to my heart, is he said he didn't want Sony to be the best company in the world or any of these things. He wanted Japan to be the best set of manufacturers in the world. Like they outsourced literally every bit of technology that they'd built out. Even before Elon Musk's electronic roadmap came out, Akio Morita had done that with electronics manufacturing, particularly in Japan. Like fundamentally pushed the manufacturing sector for an entire country forward by setting that example and saying, we can do better, and it's not just about my bottom line. And I think we need larger primes in India to play that part in as many ways as they can. So yeah, that's it.
That's very well said, Rahul, and thank you so much for concluding on those remarks. I think now that we've had a chance to have this discussion and sort of go through the various pain points, it'll hopefully open up a much larger discussion on where we're at, and for company like organizations like USIBC to keep giving us more platforms to discuss things like this. Thank you so much. Thank you to all the panelists and to all the audience to have taken out the time to come for this.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you so much to the speakers of the session. We'll now move to the next session, which is a fireside chat titled Don't Miss the Commercial Mill Space Opportunity. This is going to be a quick half-an-hour fireside chat, and I would like to invite the speakers on stage. I would like to invite Lieutenant General Vinod Khandare, Principal Advisor, USC Department of Defense, Ministry of Defense, to please join us on the stage. I would also invite Captain Vishal Kanwar, MD, India Aerospace and Defense and Space, PwC. And to moderate the session, I would like to invite Wing Commander Satyam Kushwaha, Director, Indian Space Association. Can I please have a round of applause? Thank you.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I hope to keep it interesting so that we get more crowd from outside to inside. Very honored to have Lieutenant General Khandare sir and Captain Kanwar sir here. So General Khandare played a very important role in the conceptualization of the defense space challenges that was rolled out by the Ministry of Defense. In fact, it's because of, one of the primary supporters of that effort, and the person who helped steer that effort in the Ministry of Defense is General Khandare, and I'm very honored to have him on the stage with us.
Thank you, sir.
And who can forget the stellar role played by Captain Kanwar and his team from PwC in articulating the civilian opportunity in the Indian space sector in India. So on that note, sir, let's get down to business straight away. So may I ask you, sir, as to how do you see the Indo-US strategic partnership evolving? And in that, how do you see the Indo-US defense-based cooperation coming up, sir?
Satyam, firstly, an honor to be here, and especially with Captain Kanwar here. I look at your question as something which everyone understands, but that should not be something overwhelming for us. The partnership is decided, the path is known. I think what is most important now to how to get it operational, how to get operational fast, and to derive maximum output from that. Unless we get our act right, such sessions will not lead us anywhere. So what my point here is, everyone knows that this partnership is going in the right direction. Technologically, US is way ahead of the rest of the world. So we definitely need technology from there. And the word which has been very carefully chosen is partnership. Partnerships have a clear definition. India, with its geopolitics and foreign policy, is very clear about the difference between alliances and partnerships. So technologically, we are partnering with US US has different reasons to partner with us. Quite a bit of it is geopolitics. Geopolitics can change. So the secret lies in how fast we operationalize it.
In that, there's been a lot of talk happening, sir, for the last 2 to 3 years. In fact, US IBC has been playing a very important role in having monthly conferences on the VC and trying to see how the commercial ecosystem can also move along as this relationship matures. How do you see, what do you see as the key enablers to make it move forward? And if I may take the liberty to putting it this way, that rather than just looking at technology sharing or just thinking about co-developing, how do you move towards collaborative interdependence so that this relationship is immunized from geopolitical challenges and we actually do what we should be doing? How do you see that?
See, when you look at the heading, the topic for our discussion, commercial military space,
Yes.
that has the answer for this. The moment we start increasing the scale and we have the commercial aspect into this, the money which is always short in the military part will get channelized here. And space is one domain where there are no distinct lines that the civil sector ends here and the military sector starts there. Whatever is the output which is going to be churned, whether it is in terms of technology or in terms of products or in terms of human capital skills, you can't stop it that, okay, here is a full stop and here is where the civil stops and the military ends. You look at a normal satellite which is moving, the satellite doesn't know where the boundary finishes, no? It's a question of how we utilize it, whether it is a collaboration between countries, collaboration between technologies, collaboration between the various domains which have been spoken about all through. Collaboration is the only word, and that is what will make it work.
Captain Cover, coming to you. What are the new technology areas which you feel will have an impact on the military capabilities and the nations put together?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. I would like to answer that in the taxonomy which normally is used for commercial military space, like General Khandari mentioned, that being the focus. So typically, if you look at the space value chain of upstream, midstream, and downstream, I think the area where technology collaboration between India and US could bring in more focus is one on the upstream, that is on satellite manufacturing, launch vehicles, launch on demand. Because tomorrow's warfare, our satellites in the air, we need to have the resilience to put new satellites when something is knocked off by an ASAT. So that's one area in upstream. Then on the downstream, I see two areas where the technology which US is using for satellite imagery, data analytics, and secondly, on the communication side. Now we know that on the defense side, we have a COMCASA agreement between the two governments, we have BECA agreement. Now what will it take for us to take this agreement in the space domain as well? Because space as a means, as a platform, in terms of technology is the answer for defending against tomorrow's hypersonic missiles, for defending against attacks in space. So typically, there are three realms in space where defense gets impacted. One is space for defense, where space enables the militaries globally, and there is militarization of space. And second is defense of space itself. Satellites are at the risk of cyber attacks and satellite. One of the technologies which the US is right now dabbling is with creating a fission reactor, a nuclear reactor on a satellite. Now that gives an advantage to satellite in case there is a ASAT attack on that satellite. There's enough energy available to reposition the satellite, plus also have its own laser to stop the incoming satellite from coming. So that's an area where probably, so we need to see what are the future technologies that we can partner with US. And finally is this, when you talk of space warfare, using directed energy weapons or getting into areas of using electromagnetic weapons in space. bear in mind the Outer Space Treaty very clearly says that any celestial object, moon or wherever, if man lands on Mars tomorrow, there have to be non-militarized. But the question is, are we going to live up to this? You know, a simple thing, the United Nations Convention of the Laws of the Sea is not accepted by all the nations in the world today. And we know what's happening in South China Sea. So the challenge is, will the Outer Space Treaty live up? Will it lead to militarization of the, the celestial objects beyond the outer space? So these are the challenges we have to think about and come out at a collaboration between India and US, because I think a lot of sense comes on table when these two countries collaborate. One last point I want to make is, when we did the space strategy in space and ISRO, we realized, we did a benchmarking, and we realized 30% of the revenue of the space, commercial military space, brings it in the space industry. You know, and this is across upstream, midstream, and downstream. So out of every $100 which the space economy you have, $30 is coming from a military satellite or military communication or military satellite imagery, navigation, or a broadband usage. So therefore, enabling, and I think IDEX doing under your tutelage, sir, I think enabling space through defense is, I would say, creating new technologies for tomorrow's commercialization and use of in various other sectors. And we know space is used in, other than military, more than 16 sectors, as we realize now.
So you and your team, they worked very extensively to build the strategy for the civil and space sector. Now, how do you see the defense sector in this regard, since you did a lot of analysis? And could you also add that how the new FDI rules which have come, how they are going to bring investments into India? And there, if you look at it, that how much would it be supporting the military as well as the civilian component? And by military component, I'm talking of dual use, like PNT, ISR, and communications. I'll restrict my comments only to that domains.
Yeah, that's a good question, Wing Commander. So when we undertook this space strategy exercise, the boundary conditions were that we will not look at defense because of the classified nature of the work, and also the fact that even DRDO today launches a lot of, puts satellites in the air, which are electronic warfare or ELINT payload carrying satellites. So this is an area which we did not look at. So now, having done this work, and now we in space is in the process of implementing the satellite, the strategic roadmap for satellite manufacturing and launch vehicles, I think we need to look at a holistic strategy which includes defense. And if you look at whether it is the globally, whilst doing the strategy exercise, we interacted with NASA, JAXA, even the UK Space Agency, ESA. Typically, they have followed the same path. Even interestingly, most of these countries created initially a strategy document for the commercial space industry, and then they incorporated the military. So I think we need to have a holistic white paper on space, which is defense and non-defense, or military and commercial, both inclusive. That would give us a much clearer view as to how dual use can come into play. The second question which you asked is, what are the areas that we could, having looked at it, areas where military comes in a big way. So typically what we see is that in the upstream, especially satellite manufacturing, we had the previous discussion, there is less cash flows in India. And that is where the military investment comes in. I'll give you an example. Today, India does not have its own satellite broadband constellation. Now, this was debated a lot between ISRO in space and when we did the strategy exercise. And we realized that, with ISRO's budget of $2 billion, more or less over the last, say, 6-7 years, getting into a constellation for satellite broadband is a big question mark. Whereas, if you see the Ukraine-Russia war, today, Ukraine's, all their command centers have been knocked off by Russian strikes, and they are using Starlink's constellation and the cloud data to continue the warfare and maintain the command and control capability. Now, if this capability has to come into India, what if both the defense and the civil come together and create their own constellation. And this is just a thought. And there is a question mark here as to when will the satellite broadband cost be equal to the terrestrial broadband. Today, satellite broadband is exorbitantly expensive. So we did a data crunching, and as per our analysis, obviously this will go somewhere around 2028 or 2029. We will see satellite broadband cost and terrestrial broadband cost same. So you might, or that is a time on your mobile you rather have a satellite broadband than connecting to a local Wi-Fi, because the cost we estimate to be same in our analysis in PwC. So if that is going to happen, then I think this is the time to start thinking about, and that's where I see a confluence of military and commercial space ecosystem coming together and creating value in the country.
In fact, that can, if we see the Starlink model, I mean, it was a fantastic commercial technology which overnight got used for military use. So I think that could be a good area where, both countries could collaborate, because the kind of market that India has, and it could be a dual use kind of an ecosystem, because what we have is the ability to consume. 1.4 billion and rising. And nowhere else in the globe will you find this captive market. And that is where I think there can be a good area to work on.
Satyam, before we go on to the next question, I agree with Captain Kanwar, and I want to highlight a couple of things here. When we talk of civil and military and we try to draw a line in between, in the new era where there is no distinction between targets, civilian targets, commercial targets, could possibly be in the interim period more important than the military targets. Even in the research and development sector, you look at the instruments of warfare which are non-attributable. A civil sector satellite development firm, which may be startup, is possibly more vulnerable than even a military installation. The kind of designs that would be residing there and the kind of theft that can take place. So the issue here is the security aspect of the developers, the innovators, is extremely important. And that is a realization. And obviously, realization is not enough. There is a cost which has to be incurred. And that cost is a national cost. May be borne by somebody else, but it is extremely important. So in this new era of warfare, there is no attributability, there is total deniability, and that is something which is important for both the domains to be equally secure. And the other point, like where you're mentioning about affordability or the cost of the satellite communication costs, which have to be borne by the user. Now, while you may look at the business, but this is something which is mandatory for the military. And if it is mandatory for the military, then 2028, very correct, as per the simulations that have been carried out. But the military would be happy if you got it as of yesterday. So then there has to be something which has to be infused to make this happen earlier. And that is where both have to work together. The minds have to work together and the execution has to work together. So this is something where only one Ministry of Defense is not involved. There are multiple ministries involved. There is civil society involved. So that is where it is whole of nation. And here we are talking about two nations. So that is where, again, what needs to be done is identify these asks or challenges and work towards each one of them in a faster time frame.
In fact, sir, if I may just apply a bit more imagination to what you both said, that the line between the civilian and the military assets is going to get diluted as even the civilian assets become much more versatile and have the potential to be used anyway. And the possibility of them being taken down during peacetime, because it could be offering some very, very critical service which the adversary may try to disrupt at a certain time. So at that time, the time may not be far when your own civilian assets need to be protected in space. And like, I come from the military aviation background, and we have that self-protection capability in every fighter that goes up in there, or any military machine that goes up in the air. So that so in times to come, probably you would have each satellite that is going up having some minimum self-defense capability. So that time cannot be ruled out. So we need to be imaginative. And for that particular reason, I feel that this can be another area where US and India can collaborate, and for two big democracies to work together which have stated common value systems and common objectives to serve mankind. I think it's very important that we have executable programs which actually bring benefit to both sides. And that is where I think we need to move towards collaborative interdependence as a term, if I may take the audacity to introduce in front of this gathering. Because unless and until there is an interdependency, you cannot have that freedom to use technology. Because tomorrow if the switch is off, I can't say that because of geopolitical reasons I am without anything. So this is something which I think leadership also at the larger level will need to consider in case we have to genuinely move in that direction. One more question to you, General, and that is that, how do you see the role of ISET being expanded to bring more collaboration in the space sector?
You know, one good thing that has happened is coming up of ISET. Again, in a democracy, while the entire lot of citizens would want to know right down to the granularity of the contents and the implications and the applications. But when you say critical technology, obviously you have to ensure that everything is not spoken of with clarity, but acted upon with a firm direction and firm tempo. So when we are looking at critical technologies, a few of these have already been spoken by Captain Kanwar. I don't want to spell out these technologies, but the thing which comes out from what Captain Kanwar said very clearly is, you do not know the future environment. You do not know the future intent of your adversary, but one thing you know very clearly, that he's going to harm you. If space domain cannot be governed like the maritime domain by the international conventions, then you must have your preparation with critical technologies in every possible domain, because the intent can change at any point in time. And that critical technology, again, there is a mindset that critical technologies can only be handled by the public sector. I think we've got to get out of that. And every possible identified critical technology, there would be some components out of it which can be made in the private sector with due precautions, of course. And as we keep moving, the policy shift has to happen. With a lot of pride and a lot of humility also, I would like to say that Ministry of Defense, which at one point in time was considered to be very rigid, but you see the kind of policies that we make and then we revisit them, we throw it open to people for discussion, then we make amendments. The same is the case with this critical technology policy. We must be flexible, we must be agile. If we are not agile, then you'll get fossilized.
So for any cooperation to really kickstart, trust and reciprocity is something which is very, very important, because that lays down the foundation that I'm going to be with you when you need me and vice versa. Now, in this regard, sir, Captain Kanwar, how do you see the Indian space startups playing an important role in the US defense space market? And how do you see this evolve, given these two factors that I brought out to you?
So I think this is a good question. And I want to start with an example. About 5 years back, we started with an initiative called DTTI, Defense Trade and Technology Initiative, again between India and US. So one of the things, of course, it had challenges. One of the major challenges it had was the question you are asking, not complete participation of the startup ecosystem, of the commercial space, of the industry, of the private ecosystem. And I think that is the mantra here. How do you attract the private ecosystem, the prime in the US, and I'll say subprime and a startup in India, a prime in India, a subprime or startup in US, in, the sweet spot in US where there are so many, thousands of these MSME equivalent companies in tier 2 cities like Detroit or, where they are looking at partnership. partnerships not only to transfer technology, and here I want to put a caveat. In our experience with PwC US, and typically when we do this, we do a lot of strategic alliances and mergers and acquisition between US, Europe, and India. The aim should not get technology. The aim should be co-design, co-develop. That should be the aim. And I think if our ecosystem keeps that as a focus, I'm very confident that the US ecosystem would also come the halfway and bring in the access to capital, bring in their technology perspective, bring in their testing capabilities. And I want to just mention something here. I see a huge shift in the way the space and aerospace and defense ecosystem is changing in the country. Almost every week we have foreign OEMs who want to come and set up manufacturing in India. And the reason is simple, because they see India as an attractive proposition. And this is the time the Indian commercial, the private industry needs to capture this market and get into co-design and co-development. And I think that will build trust. And that will not have a repetition of what happened. I'll be very candid here, what happened to DTTI. So ISET should be a success. Indo-US Tech Council should be a success. Our initiatives should be a success. And I think the Mool mantra is, like you rightly said, bring in trust and bring in more focus on the private, the startup, and the MSME ecosystem to collaborate across both the territories.
Thank you so much, sir. And over to you, General, for your last word, as they say. The General has the last word. So, any comments?
Generals have general words. But in any case, I just want to say, out of the various things, let's not go back with a feeling that something has failed, so everything will fail. No. This is a journey. We may stumble sometimes, we may walk, and then we start running. So, we started small with whatever distrust which exists between many countries, but when you move one step, the other also moves one step, and that is the way you have to move. DTTI did not work, I agree with you. But then the foundational agreements also which we made, you see the kind of hard work we had to do on that. It was not distrust, but possibly a kind of a feeling that, the other side may manipulate me. There's no question. You have to join hands because there is a common adversary. And that is why you have to join hands. So one has to understand that you'll have to work together. And it's extremely good to see the multiple initiatives that US and India both are taking. You had the ambassador and you had the chairman ISRO talking so well. And that gives you a lot of positivity to say that the future generations have a better mindset than us. And I'm sure their attitudes will take us much faster.
Absolutely. Thank you, sir. Moderator, do we have time for one or two questions? Okay. Any questions from the audience for the panel?
Yeah. Check. Good evening, sir. Firstly, the question is based on, I can see all three services represented there. So to start with, I'm Commander Rahul Verma from Tata Advanced Systems, sir. And my question comes out from a statement which was spoken by the Chinese CCP that observe our Earth, protect our homeland. The question is, how should using Principle 4, the sense state, and Principle 7, the sensing state, balance need to be established between the right of owner in the data set which we feel, and how will we stop making the satellites behave like big brothers and make them use eyes in the skies from the Chinese perspective in the middle space opportunities?
Can you repeat your question, please?
All right. So, sir, if we have, we go through the space law, we come to know there is a Principle 4 which talks about the sense state, the state which is getting sensed, the satellite is capturing data, and there is a sensing state. Now, the sensing state gets hold of the data set which is lying. That means if I have let's take a neutral country, an Argentinian satellite, and the data set is in Argentina, that the use of that particular data is not regulated. He can use it in whatever way we want. And the Chinese government has, one of the statements have said that they will try and stop it legally. So what is our stand on it, and how will it impact the military space, because then you will not be allowed to scan or use GeoRefs or LEOs on the other side of the territory. So can we throw some light on it? Are we looking at this particular aspect or not?
Look, data, we all understand the importance of data, and it looks very nice on a PowerPoint slide when we say data is oil and data is gold, but that is something which needs to be protected. And you see, last about 4 or 5 years, the Indian government has been struggling to get a data act into place. It starts with something, ends with something. But this is a journey which has just started just a couple of years back, where it found a place in the parliament to discuss. 2019, we co-authored a book on data sovereignty. And there was a lot of criticism, people talking about data localization. No, data sovereignty doesn't necessarily mean data localization. But at the same time, military data has to be protected with a different set of rules. Now, what is the Indian position on that? Wait for some more time. There is a lot of discussion which is happening on it. Any data set which is of use in military will have to be protected to ensure that data integrity and prevent it from data poisoning, because it's not only data theft, there can be data poisoning also, which will lead to wrong decisions, because increasingly we are going into AI-ready data, data-supported decision systems. So data is something which will have to be protected. And it's not only Chinese. Every country, big or small, has to protect its data. Most of the time when you hear of cyber attacks, you know, people get too excited about it. Attacks will happen. But more important is to see whether your data is stolen or poisoned. So there is a lot of thought and work going on in that, quite a bit behind closed doors. And again, here, India and US both need to work together to ensure that what we are sharing is safe. And that is one of the reasons that a lot of apprehensions come up when such collaborations take place.
I just want to add to Ajal Khandare. The Indians' recent decadal vision and space strategy talks about a EO data platform. I'm sure you heard of the Copernicus program in European Union. Now, the Copernicus program is a EO data aggregator, and it is aggregating data both for strategic use, that is military, which is only classified, not shared with the sectors, then climate, disaster management, agriculture, various sectors. So India is also looking at that. So InSpace, I can tell you, is working on that. This is one of the recommendations of the strategy, and we will soon have something like a Copernicus. And I think you should go through the strategy document, which is there on the InSpace website. It talks about it. We will have a similar data aggregator platform in India, who will disseminate, collate data from ISRO satellites, OSINT data from private satellites, also pick up data from Copernicus, Landsat programs in US, and then this data will be available for use of our sectors in future.
One thing I can add is that we have the open sky policy. So what the question that you had actually directly impinges on that, if I'm not mistaken. Right. So as of now, there is no restriction on any country imaging any country, and that is universally accepted. So I really don't know how effective will the Chinese be in trying to create a disruption in that that space. Anybody else?
Thank you, sir.
Yes, George, you got controls.
Thank you all. It's a pleasure to be here. George Weinman, I used to be Blue Origin, but I'm no longer. So I'm asking this question as an individual. There are some great programs like the NISAR satellite that is a civilian program going on between the US and India. There are examples of US foreign state cooperation on other military type programs where there's potential for, I'll call it a flagship type program between India and the United States, or India and other friendly countries, perhaps the Japanese, the Koreans, the Australians, and the United States, to do something that would be very symbolic, but also very useful, involving, and not necessarily startup companies, but larger industrial companies to demonstrate and perfect that kind of cooperation mode, similar to what NISAR has done for the civilian side between civilian agency in the US and civilian agency in India?
India's engagement in the space program is there with a large number of countries, and some of it is bilateral, some of it is multilateral also, and it is also under the aegis of some global organizations. There is no such restriction or policy restriction to say that these relationships will be driven only by the public sector. Earlier, yes, everything used to be by ISRO, but lately, after the Prime Minister opened up for the private sector, it is quite open. And in many of these discussions which happen when delegations from other countries visit, the private sector is also involved in that. Even in the events that take place, the private sector is interacting freely with foreign dignitaries, and this is a field which is going to be more and more open, and it's a very exciting field for the future.
George, if I may just add to what the General said, and that is that common interests derive programs and drive them. So till the time there is a common interest which is insulated from geopolitical risk, because space is a sector where you have long gestation periods, larger investments. So in case like-minded countries can arrive at that, I think that will add fuel to your dream that you just articulated, but we will need to watch these steps as time goes by. Thank you. With your permission, sir, we may call it off. Thank you.
For this great conversation. We're going to break for 10 minutes. There's tea, coffee being served outside. We'll reconvene at 4 p.m. We have a couple of more important sessions coming up. So please head out, grab a cup of coffee or tea, and see you in a bit.
Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. I know we're getting to that part of the day that everyone has enjoyed the conversation, but at the same time is looking forward to the reception, but also trying to internalize everything that we've learned during the day. This session is about a key deliverable of the U.S.-India Commercial Space Dialogue. One of those deliverables was to organize a mission, a tour for Indian space startups to the United States to understand the U.S. commercial space ecosystem. Now, for those of us, let me just share a personal anecdote. When I worked at the embassy for a couple of years, the International Visitor Leadership Program was my absolute favorite program, because officers get to craft a program that aligns with certain key objectives that the government has. It's cultural in nature, and it's intended to showcase America to people that maybe haven't visited the country before, or have, but have only gone in for a business meeting or something of that nature. In addition, the officers get to nominate people that they actually think are going to be true leaders in the future. So the fact that you gentlemen are here, firstly, congratulations. Yeah. We want to share, I want this to be a little bit of a sharing. I'm going to have a little bit of an informal format. We want to learn from these gentlemen, what they learned, and so on. But first, a little bit of a challenge. Many of you I should have introduced myself. I'm Jay Gullish, and I'm the spouse of a diplomat, and we're currently in Geneva. So I have a bar of genuine Swiss chocolate for you, if you can answer the following question. It can either be milk or dark. That's your choice. Okay. Who is the most famous Indian to have participated in the International Visitor Leadership Program? It's a bit of a trick question.
Prime Minister Narendra Modi.
Okay, it's a good thing I brought 4 chocolate. Who's the second most famous Indian? I have to, this is the tiebreaker here. Indira Gandhi. Okay, we still don't have a winner here. How many prime ministers of India have been on the International Visitor Leadership Program? Pick a number. It's one between 1 and 10.
Oh, maybe 4.
Okay, what do you guess?
I'm guessing 3.
This is the elimination round.
2.
3.
Can't take 3.
You pick 2. 1 and 5. You're 1 or 5 or more than 5.
All right, timeout.
5.
Okay, enough. We have a winner right here. The answer is 4. Dark or milk? Chocolate. Okay, dark chocolate. Wonderful. It's under the ethics rules. It is Swiss, so it's quite expensive, but you're allowed to take it home and don't have to register it. But all kidding aside, the International Visitor Leadership Program, it's just a fabulous program. And what I'm going to ask you guys to do is if someone can, and I'm going to hand the microphone to Kishan, if you can just give us a quick itinerary of what you did. How long were you there for?
So we were there for 2 weeks for the IVLP program. We started from Washington, D.C., and then we were at Los Angeles, and then we were Cape Canaveral, Florida. So there were 4 days at DC where we met, where we were firstly oriented to the program. We met people from the federal government, from the Senate. We understood how the US government is thinking to promote space technology in United States. I think then we also went to the NASA headquarters and we got to go to Goddard Science Center, and there we got to know from the NASA's point of view how they want to interact with the private industry and also accelerate in research. And we got to see like amazing facility that Goddard has, where they were actually building the Nancy Roman telescope. Then we also met a few private company representatives, industry representatives from AWS, Viasat, from Blue Origin as well. Let me know if I'm missing some folks out, but yeah. Then we went to LA. There we mainly went to Caltech for like mainly visited JPL and USC. These were the 2 academic institutes we went to, and we also got to visit the facility of Viasat and SpaceX. And lastly, when we came back to Florida, we met a company called Viaspace who are building rockets in a very innovative way. And we also got to visit the Cape Canaveral launch site, and how we got to understand how USA over the past so many years have actually come to the current stage and the speed in which they have propelled to be here. You guys can add more points here.
So you visited Washington, D.C., you went to Goddard, so that's D.C., Maryland, and then you went to California, and then you went back to Florida. Great. And is it my understanding that afterwards you guys stayed in D.C. for a big commercial event, is that right? Yeah. Okay. Right.
Yes, yeah.
Okay, great, thank you. So, rapid fire question. What was the highlight of your trip?
2 things I would say. One was SpaceX facility, the rocket factory tour, and the second one was Universal Studios, where we got to play.
Nice.
Yeah, I'm copying, but yeah, I mean, I'd been to SpaceX before 5 years ago, so I got to see how much they had actually grown in 5 years, being in such a deep tech and a slow-moving industry. That was fascinating to see. Okay. And secondly, a completely different space company who had been very, very focused on innovation via space. The dedication in innovation and the freedom they were doing innovation there, and the way they were working and thinking, that was very inspiring.
Srinath, over to you.
So yeah, SpaceX for one, and then the other one was actually watching the rovers that were in JPL. They had the identical twins that they work with on the ground, right? That was a lot of fun.
The Mars box, that is really cool.
Yeah, my answer would be opposite. I really enjoyed the government setup in DC, how different departments work together, visiting Department of State and Department of Commerce. That was one of the highlights for me. And then, of course, JPL, seeing the engineering models of the real rovers which are on Mars. That was the major highlight.
Thank you. So gentlemen, you're all super impressive in your own right. How did you get into the space industry?
This was an accident to me. I never planned to be in the space industry. I was working mostly as a student on a program in my university building satellites, and that's how I ventured into building what we're building today. We work on space domain awareness. So it's mostly to track what's happening in space.
So you're an accidental...
Yeah, accidental entrepreneur.
So the journey for Galaxy, so firstly Galaxy, we are launching satellites that do Earth observation. We fuse synthetic aperture radar and multispectral images for all-time, all-weather intuitive imagery. How we started was me and all the other co-founders. We were actually part of a college team at IIT Madras called Avishkar Hyperloop. And we were participating in a competition by SpaceX. And that is how we actually went to SpaceX in 2019. And we got introduced to the space industry. And in that competition itself, we were advised and guided by SpaceX on how to do, how normal space industry works, PDR, CDR, and how FRR, how the terminology also we got introduced mainly by SpaceX and Tesla at that time. And when we were in USA, via a few of our alums at IIT Madras, we also got introduced to imaging, and that is when we actually also understood that there's another imaging called synthetic aperture radar apart from optical imaging. And we found a particular gap that people were trying to solve using existing satellites, but that required a specific set of different satellites to go into. And that's when we started our journey around 3 years ago. Yeah, I think that's mainly it.
I grew up as a space enthusiast, probably because of all the science fiction I was reading. I think when I was in my last year of high school, I had an opportunity to touch one of ISRO's satellites. I don't remember the satellite now. It was a geostationary satellite though. That's where it started really. But then my journey in my academics took me through engineering. Then I worked in Wall Street for a while, and then I came back to India to start Agnikul. Mainly because there was this one moment when I was in Los Angeles where I saw who now I could call a customer, who came with a stroller, the one that you take on a plane or something, and he opened it and there was a small satellite sitting in there, and he said there was no one to launch this. And this was in 2016 when SpaceX was already launching a lot. So I thought, okay, there may be some business that you could build out of launching small satellites. So that's how Agnikul was born. Of course, having a pursuit here in India, finding the right academic partners, and then leveraging on what is available here, and all of that followed after that. But this is the core idea.
So it was love at first sight?
Well, for me, it was meeting Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin in 2012 in DC. Your childhood heroes, and they were kind enough to take me to NASA Goddard, where I was able to see the James Webb Space Telescope being assembled at that point of time. So after coming back after that experience, we thought we should do something on our own. Let's put a platform for ourselves. So that's pretty much.
That's great, thank you. Rohan, I'm going to start with you, but I'm going to use a point that I think Srinath had mentioned, sci-fi. What's your favorite sci-fi book, storyline, universe?
H.G. Wells, the classic, The Time Machine, 1960. That's my all-time favorite.
2001, Space Odyssey, the book. I think that's one of the reasons why I am in space tech today.
I mean, that's a scary one, right? I mean, with all this talk of AI,
But couldn't stop thinking about a monolith being buried under the moon's surface. Until today, any black structure still reminds me of that once in a while.
Yeah, for me it's Cosmos. I started with a TV show, but then I went and actually read the book, and that's actually much better. Yeah.
There are 2 TV series that I'm watching lately. One is called For All Mankind,
and the second one is Expanse.
Oh, yeah, I'm watching that as well.
Yeah,
Don't
so
tell me
both
how
of
it ends.
both of it are really good, I guess.
Thanks. I'm a Stargate fan, something about a wormhole that just gets me and my family going. All right, so you're in the United States. What surprised you? And I'm going to just kind of go out of order here, maybe Krishnan and Srinath, and then we'll do the two ends. What surprised you, the United States? Like something you saw that was just unexpected from your experience? I did not tell them these questions, so trying to give them a little heads up.
Yeah, mainly what surprised again is the amount of the pace at which the companies were actually growing and going ahead, and how the government as well there was thinking at a very long-term view and also figuring out ways in which to bring the industry to the vision that the government or the NASA was having of 50 years, and how to ensure that the private industry is also catching up, so that when they want to do research, the things that they've already developed and are possible commercially, how they've actually slowly and gradually ingested that into the industry. And that's something that was really fascinating, actually.
Can I get a little geeky on this one?
Sure.
In one of the tours, they got us to see a clean room of, I think, 1,000 class, right? Which was about this, the size of this, maybe even bigger than this, even bigger. And that surprised me. We have a, 10,000 class clean room at our facility, and I know what it takes to maintain that clean. And this clean room just blew my mind. So that definitely surprised me.
So for those of us in the room that don't understand that, like explain a little bit about what that technology or capability is.
Yeah, so I think for when you're building satellites or certain very high precision or complex instruments, you need to have a certain very controlled environment where the amount of dust particles, amount of humidity, the temperature, all of these have to be extremely tightly maintained. And it's a real, it's a very difficult challenge to do that, because our environment is our environment, and it's not that clean. So I think having a facility or an enclosure of that class, I literally saw a huge crane sitting inside a clean room. And cranes have grease and dirt, and it is not a very clean piece of equipment. So I didn't know that, at that scale, this could be maintained. So that was something that I was, really surprised by.
Okay. Go ahead, Ron.
I think one thing which I was very surprised, at the same time very inspired, is the art of storytelling, which US has is a global leader, I would say. How you inspire younger students and how you promote space, be it visit to the Kennedy Space Center, the way you narrate the story of how successful the space shuttle was, and how all of this has led to successful companies and successful technologies coming out of the US. We have heard about it before, but seeing it physically, also hearing it physically, is something surprised me.
I mean, that's so interesting. I don't know if you saw the women's panel, but I mean, something that Divya mentioned was precisely that, about storytelling. And we heard that Dr. Dutta also said that it's important to bring in different skill sets, because that communications piece. And why I mentioned Divya, we should just reference Dhruva Space also attended, but Sanjay, who was on the program, was traveling internationally, not be able to be with us, which is a shame, because he's one of my oldest and dearest friends here in India, so I'm very proud of him and what all you guys are doing as well. Over to you.
For me, one of the most inspiring and surprising thing was seeing the SpaceX rocket factory. It was truly like a Ford moment, so to say, because they were literally building things at scale that you can never imagine, and launching rockets every week is not something that's easy, right? So they have achieved that scale, and I have never seen things happen so fast in the space industry, at least. So what I've learned from that is the pace at which you have to execute things or execute projects or space missions. So that's one of the things that I learned during my IVLP visit. And the second thing is, this is very specific to the government interaction with private companies and the support provided by the government to the private companies to develop capability for the country. So it's more or less like there is no competitive environment, and they want private companies to build capacity for the country. So they're building towards national capacity development rather than just a bunch of commercial companies doing different stuff. So this is something that's very inspiring that I think we should take back and then work on bridging that gap between government working hand in hand with private companies.
Thank you. Anirudh, hold on to the mic. So the International Visitor Leadership Program, at its core, is a cultural awareness program. And yes, you got to go do something really cool around commercial space. But from a cultural point of view, like, did you come across something culturally, a person, something you didn't realize about the United States, or a takeaway from that sort of cultural arena, like people to people?
Yeah, I think what I've learned, I mean, this is very common about the US, I guess. It's very much capitalist, and everything is driven by, like what Rohan said, storytelling and real marketing about products and showcasing what you do, which I don't think the eastern part of the world does it the best, like US does. And the other thing is just the way the government operates. So we had one whole lecture about how federal government works and how the state works. So that was something that I learned during.
You mentioned the state. Did you meet any of the state authorities, like Rich DeBella, who we heard from earlier? Yeah. He used to run, I think, Space Florida, which is a state-level agency. It was kind of interesting.
Right. So we met state-level representatives as well, like Space Florida, and also I think one of the very specific programs that is close to what we are doing is TRAX. That's again by Office of Space Commerce. Which specifically works on building a common environment for space domain awareness.
Great. Rohan, I'm going to bounce it over to you, and then we'll come on back.
Okay. Culturally, I was always fascinated by the different fast food available in the US. So I never had corn dogs in India. So that's something which is available there in the US. Okay, that's something I was fascinated about. Other than that, culturally, what US has demonstrated is how different cultures can also coexist together, which we also have that in India. Something which is also respectable of the US is how multiple cultures can gel well and contribute to a cause, develop towards a cause. In this case, the cause being space exploration. Culturally, that's a big takeaway.
So I worked in the US for about 8-9 years, so it's a little hard for me to tell, what exactly struck me in this trip. But maybe from my, 8-9 years there, I think I just felt it was a lot more things were little more systematic, I would say, in terms of, daily life, getting through day-to-day work. Probably compared to India, where at least where I grew up, you're always figuring stuff out. All the time there was a little bit of unknown every day. So that, I think, was, at least that's what I still remember. As if you quickly ask me what's the difference, I would start with that.
Okay.
One major aspect that I will say very similar from here and there is like they have extreme work ethic, but they were also very mindful of their responsibilities in a sense, and they will be able to, like, even a very young startup to a company like SpaceX, everyone is working in a very synchronous manner, and like at a not only at a country level, even at a company level, people are not like doing the same thing again and again, which sometimes I've seen in companies here or even in organizations here. And in that way, with that work ethic, and they were able to execute things faster and even go home in the evening and have a nice time as well.
Okay, good. Question for you. So America is sports mad. Did you guys do anything sporting while you were there?
No, we were trying to get an NBA match, but we couldn't get the tickets.
Okay. What's your favorite sport?
Football.
Kabaddi, football, or cricket?
Soccer, mainly.
Soccer. And who's your favorite team?
Manchester United.
Oh, I'm Arsenal. Sorry. Pass the mic down. Srinath, what's your favorite sport?
Cricket here. In fact, that's how I met my other co-founder, so I remember it.
And your favorite team?
Yeah, now it has become Chennai Super Kings.
Oh, Chennai Super Kings, nice. You know, they have a corresponding team now in Dallas with the same owners. Okay. So maybe we'll have a cricket challenge. I think I know who will win. Is India going to win the gold medal in Los Angeles in cricket in 2028? It's an easy question.
I'd say yes.
Okay, good answer. Rohan, over to you. Favorite sport?
Cricket.
Okay, favorite team?
Oh, RCB.
Okay, all right, okay.
It is the same. I just watch RCB matches. That's it.
Okay.
I don't watch any other sports.
I'm a Kabaddi fan. I don't even know why I love it, but it's just so phenomenal to watch. So I'm going to form a team, the Ferengi Fire. So, if you know any coaches. All right. So America also has, to stick on this cultural arena, so lots of different types of food. So what's your favorite non-Indian food, and what did you have in the United States?
I don't want to answer this question because all four of us are vegetarians and we were going for Indian food or maybe Mexican. So I think my favorite is Chipotle.
Chipotle,
Well,
yeah. That's a favorite in my household too.
It's about that.
Okay, Chipotle. Anyone else? Chipotle?
Yeah, Chipotle.
Chipotle? Chipotle? Chipotle. Is Chipotle here yet?
Yes, we have a
So we
famous
have a similar,
a US entrepreneur who started California Burrito here.
Well, that is so awesome. Can't wait to try Chipotle here. I bet it's going to be super, super spicy. So there's a lot of SpaceX conversations. If you could ask Elon Musk or Gwen Shotwell a single question about their business, what would you ask them? A question for Elon Musk or Gwen Shotwell, so sort of the CEO of that.
Yeah, the first question is how could you think of scale? What amazed me is they said last year they were just short of one launch, 99 launches they did. This year they want to do 150 launches. That's around one launch every 2 days. So it's like, I mean, yeah, it gives you chills. Like, how could they even think of that? So that was one thing which I want to ask.
Yeah, how do you go tell a story about a vision that is so big that, you know, without being worried about getting mocked at? I think now everyone talks about species being multi-planetary and so on, but I keep thinking about how it must have been for someone to listen to that for the first time. So yeah, something to learn about or ask them about how that is okay to go and pitch that, yeah, we are building things that will make human species multiplanetary.
Okay.
So one thing I would want to ask is, like, SpaceX I see is very, very vertically integrated. Firstly, why did they think of going in this way? Wouldn't they have been much more quicker if they had actually taken help from other industries? But in a long run, is it the reason why they are actually achieving 99 launches in a year? So that's the question. Yeah.
I mean, that's a really poignant question. So if anyone knows SpaceX, they had a bunch of innovations, but one of them was they vertically integrated, where everyone else said, I'm going to buy widgets from everywhere and integrate it. And Elon Musk said, I'm going to do it all in-house.
There is one video which I saw a couple of days ago, but that was released 6 years ago. It's called Earth to Earth Travel from a Rocket. And this was a video released by SpaceX, like I said, 6 years ago. I just want to ask, when would that become true? Because I'm traveling a lot these days. I think we need something like that as soon as possible.
Thanks. I want to open this up. Does anyone out there have any questions for these gentlemen? I'll continue. Yep, please. Okay.
Think more in terms of how we would understand how Elon Musk thinks. Probably Elon Musk didn't hear a lot of no's in his head. And don't tell your employees no. Let them just waste like 2 to 5% of your GDP. That will take you closer to Mr. Musk. That's my thought. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions for these gentlemen from the audience? I have a few more. George, over to you, sir.
I came in a little bit through your Q&A session, so I hope you haven't already answered this one, but project yourself 5 years from now, or 10 years if you prefer. What does the US-India relationship look like for you in the development that you see going forward? What do you expect it to be, and what do you maybe hope it to be?
Well, if I may take that question first. First of all, the advantage is both of us are democracies, and we're all dreamers, and there are a lot of successful Americans in the US as well. I mean, successful Indians in the US as well. So this gives us hope to do bigger things. But where we see 5 years down the line is space is dominated by the US, but we would like to see India at least overtake in the private ecosystem, at least overtake China globally, so that you can make us a truly spacefaring nation. It would be a collective affair, all of us working together, because as an industry, I always say this, the biggest employer after 10 years is going to be the space industry, because every specialization can work in space. Right? So that's where I see things going.
So I'd like to add to that is like this was actually one of the major topics there when we were where we were trying to understand how the India-US collaboration is being planned out, and they were being planned out right in front of us as well. That how can India and US collaborate not only at the organization like NASA, ISRO level, but at the industry level as well. Like right now we see NISR happening where it's a big achievement for both the countries. But how in the future it's not only the organizations, but the entire country with the industries as a whole can collaborate together. That's something that personally I would want to see. In terms of Galaxy, we do work with US companies right now as I speak, and most of our customers are US companies, are going to be US companies as well, being in Earth observation and focusing on natural disaster. So there's definitely a lot of collaboration, but hoping to see much more coming in terms of STEM research as well.
Anirudh, does Digitara have any US partners or US capital or anything of that nature?
Yeah, so we do have US partners. One of the very special data partners for us is US Department of Defense. So we get data from US DoD to do space domain awareness while we are building our sensor infrastructure. That's one of the things that I can say. And the second thing is one of our investors is also a US investor. It's Sequoia Capital. Before it was called Sequoia Capital India. Now it's Peak 15 Partners. So these are two things. Apart from that, we're also starting a US company next month.
Where is it based?
Colorado Springs.
Oh, nice. Makes sense.
Yes, so we're just building a team there.
Wonderful. Srinath, any US partners? Partners, relationships, collaboration, just sort of
yeah, there's
ties together here.
Couple of investors who are from the US, Celesta, I think a couple of people were here as well from Celesta. Yeah, vendors, customers, I think it's a global industry. You eventually end up buying something from people in the US or selling something to people in the US. So yeah, that's there.
Great, thank you. And Rohan, want to close it out? Where do you see yourself in 10 years, or do you have US collaboration? You can take your pick of those two.
Okay. Right now we collaborate with Princeton on subjects like plasma physics, because that's one of the global powerhouses when it comes to plasma physics.
Great.
10 years down the line, this year, by end of this year, we'll be opening a subsidiary in the US, preferably in the state of, or near Washington, DC, I would say.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Well, we have time for one final question, so what should my final question be? All kidding aside, so it's a really important one, and I saved this one for last. So the whole purpose of today was not only to showcase the US and India relationship and the emerging ecosystem, but to also figure out what we should be doing next. So if you could ask or tell or share sort of one thing with the US and Indian governments about how to promote collaboration in the US-India commercial space arena, what would you say?
I think we need to have joint innovation programs, because space is one such sector where it's mostly closed, or it's dual use in nature, because of which we have a lot of restrictions while we have to work with other countries. And it's the same for India-US relations today. And I think things are easing up right now, but I think we need more joint exercises or innovation programs where private industry can collaborate with a government agency there, and vice versa, and private collaborations in both of these countries has to be more and encouraged, which we really don't have today.
Yeah, great, thank you.
Completely agree with Anirudh here. Like collaboration at an industry level for doing in the long view per se is much more. That's something that can be explored, and I think this IndusX as a challenge is trying to promote that, and I'm hoping to see what next is trying to come, so that we can collaborate with a particular vision in mind.
Great, thank you. Srinath?
So on a more friendly note, can an Indian passport be easier to enter US? That's something in a long 10-year horizon I would like to see. Of course, other than that, I would agree with Anirudh and Kishan here. But I think there are enough programs already today. Just to add to that, probably more awareness around what is already out there, because I think there are a lot of pockets of information, but it's not easily available or easily spoken about. So there's a lot of myth around what can and cannot be done. So I think if we break that, already we can make things move faster.
Thank you.
There's one thing I would like to differ. Of course, I agree with all of them, and it makes total sense. But one thing which I would say would truly add value to our two countries' relation is having a few of the top Ivy League universities in the US set up their off-country campuses here in India.
Wonderful, thank you. Well, gentlemen, you are truly an impressive group, and I want to thank you for your time. I'm going to ask the audience here to give them a warm round of applause. Thank you so much for everything. So, Diti, over to you.
Thank you, Jay, and the panelists for a great conversation. Next up, we have, can I call upon Dr. Rajshri Dattakumar from Geospatial World Chamber of Commerce to moderate a session on geospatial and space situational awareness. Can I request all the panelists of the session to also join her on the stage?
I thank the team USIBC for inviting me to be part of this conference and to be part of this particular session, which is geospatial awareness, I'm calling it, and space situational awareness, brown and greenfield segments. That's the theme. Before I request my panelists to introduce themselves, I would like to share a few data points. So the Indian geospatial market is going to surpass USD 8 billion by 2025, while the Indian space industry has already reached USD 9 billion. And at the global level, geospatial market is expected to grow or reach USD 1.34 trillion by 2030, whereas the global space economy will be worth USD 1.8 trillion by 2035, which is which was 630 USD billion in 2023. Now, I also have an observation. We have always understood space situational awareness, SSA, in India, in the area of, or in the field of defense Why? Because the national space policy is more for the civilian. It's a civilian space policy, whereas SSA, when we are talking about SSA, it is being understood in the context of, defense. So that is one observation. And before we go on to specific questions, I welcome all my panelists here, and I'll take my seat. And I'll request Krishna to introduce yourself, and also if you can just briefly talk about what your organization does or the offerings that you have.
Okay.
Yeah.
So hi, my name is Krishna, and I'm representing two companies here, Kaleido and SatSure. So in a nutshell, what we do, we are a full-stack Earth observation company, where SatSure is into data analytics from geospatial data and building applications for agri, climate, infra, aviation, and defense. On the other hand, Kaleido is on the hardware side, where we're building payloads, multispectral payloads for Earth observation to analytics-ready data for companies, stakeholders, organizations, or governments to build application on top of that. So we are across the EO value chain, and by 2026 mid, we plan to launch our own fleet of satellites with 1.2 meter resolution and a swath of 65 kilometers, which means you can cover 1 million square kilometer per day globally. That's all about the company, and I'll speak more about it later.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Shreyas. I represent Digantara. We are a space situational awareness company that is building end-to-end infrastructure for using space operations and space traffic management. We seek to add value across the value chain, predominantly both on data and analytics side. On the data side, we are looking to launch a constellation of satellites to track objects in orbit. And analytics, on the analytics side, we want to use these data sets to get meaningful analytics for both defense as well as commercial industry. Good to meet you all.
Lieutenant Colonel Rakesh Verma.
Yeah, good evening, everyone. I'm Lieutenant Colonel Rakesh Verma, veteran from Indian Army, and I am presently the country director for Defense Intelligence sector for Maxar Intelligence. I'll take this opportunity today to update you all that Maxar Technologies earlier, from October 2023 onwards, is now Maxar Space Systems and Maxar Intelligence. So Maxar Space Systems is basically into manufacturing of satellites. That is the upstream section, and Maxar Intelligence is looking after the downstream, that is the imagery and value-add analytics onto it. Thank you so much.
My first question to you.
Okay, ma'am.
How do you think Maxar can contribute towards this entire concept of space situational awareness? And how are we going to see the Indian market getting expanded with this?
Okay, ma'am. Maxar is, say, about from the last 20 years, the oldest company as far as the space systems are concerned. We have got about 125 petabytes of archive data only to create the value-added products. So as far as the space situational awareness is concerned, we are already working on it. I won't say that it is at the nascent level, but yes, we are imaging for Department of Defense, and slowly we are coming out with solutions to the commercial sector also. As far as the commercial sector is concerned, and India is concerned, I'll pick up the threads from the previous discussion we were having here. There was one question that Elon Musk, number of launches are being multiplied day to day, almost one launch every day. And second was, what is Elon Musk's thought process? And George was asking, think yourself 5 years ahead. So if you combine all these three, this is what the future for SSA is. To give you some data points, 1957, first rocket launched. By about 2022, 6,000 and more launches were there. About 16,000 satellites up in the space. Now these satellites I'm talking about in the LEO, low Earth orbit. About 13,000 are still there, and the next 5 years, these payloads would be somewhere around 30,000, going and coming from polar orbits, that is again LEO. Now what is happening? The disruptors over here, first was the reusable rockets where SpaceX is concerned. Second, the miniaturization of the satellites. So earlier, for a satellite launch, Somewhere about 14 lakhs dollars was the price for per kg mass for lifting a satellite. Now after the miniaturization has happened, it has come down to say about 14,000. So major disruptions. That is why you see so many launches happening. People are catching up the technologies. Now you can imagine the next coming years, what will happen at the low Earth orbit when all these satellites have to cross at the poles. There, the conjunction analysis happens where NEA or space situational awareness is concerned. So the entrepreneurs and the people who are looking at, there are two aspects. One is the government sector. Obviously, at this point of time in SSA, the government sector, all things will not be open because of the geopolitical business and geopolitical considerations. You may not be taking out the pictures and showing it to everybody, but yes, at the commercial level where the single operators are concerned, there are many tasks which are to be done, right from doing the navigation to assessing the orbit, deorbiting to the insurers. Much more is there to be done. So thinking forward for the entrepreneurs, for India, where such kind of generations, the IITs, the young startups are coming, there's a lot. It's a totally greenfield industry, space situational awareness, which I would say.
Wonderful observation. Shreyas, my question to you, since I've been given to understand that Digantara is working in US, and there is a good India-US collaboration through your offerings. So how do you see you, Digantara, contributing to US market in the context of space situational awareness, or space per se first, and then SSA?
Very interesting question, right? So when it comes to space situational awareness, we have seen that US has been leading the charge for a really long time. They have built amazing data sets that are out there. But one of the key things that we at Digantara bring to the table is different modalities of data that are out there. We have been hearing from top leaders globally that we need more modalities of data for space domain awareness and space situational awareness. And the data that's out there is not just enough to ensure safer space operations. So one of the key things that we bring from Digantara is a really complementary capability that is currently out there compared to the US data that's out there. So we bring our own proprietary sensors to track objects in space from space. And that key technology is we use LiDARs to track objects. And these sensors and these sensor data add an additional layer of value to the end users. And so it's a very interesting proposition for us to work with the US ecosystem, where each of us bring unique capabilities and complementary capabilities.
Right. Krishna, my question to you, since you are, Satshore and Kalidio, you are in downstream, you are in upstream, so how do you see this entire reconciliation of geospatial capabilities as well as space capabilities in the context of the SSA, the wealth, asset management and other sectors or other aspects that SSA caters to? How do you see that getting reconciled through your Satshore and Kalidio products and services?
See, if I may, on the behalf of EO industry, I can tell something that if you have the ability to observe the world, then you have the capability to change the world. When we call the ability to observe the world, under observation, we get all these EO satellites. And assets like satellites in orbit is as much as important as data that it is producing for sectors on Earth. Because I will speak more from the downstream side, because what happens is that as people say data is the new oil, but what is data? At the end, data is nothing but information. And those information is now being consumed by a lot of stakeholders across the world than ever before. I mean, 10 years ago, there was a huge barrier to access satellite data. Today, there's a huge barrier to access insights from those satellite data. And this is the case that we are seeing with companies like Agri, companies like into market intelligence. To give a small example, there was a company that was interested in utilizing satellite imagery to understand what is the construction rate in a particular region. And why was the intelligence or the data required for that region was them to approach that region sufficiently to position their painting solutions and all those things. So you never know who will need certain information, but the magnitude of such information being consumed is growing exponentially. And for us to meet that, we need to have sufficient and enough satellites or the assets in space to cater those requirements. And on its SSA part, to make sure that the exponential growth in the number of assets is safe. This is where we need solutions from Digantara. This is where we need solutions from other companies to make sure that satellite isn't, being not, like there's no collision or there's no harm to it. So it's a complete holistic approach that we are looking at it.
Looking at any kind of collaborative partnership within the Indian companies, space companies, or geospatial space, or downstream, upstream companies? Are we looking at those collaborative partnerships? Because you mentioned that Digantara, the role of Digantara is very crucial when it comes to ensuring that there is no collision happening. So I'm just generally curious to know, how are we looking at it as an industry, Indian industry?
So it's not just about the Indian industry. I think space domain awareness, space situational awareness is a fundamental infrastructure that we need going forward. Like just mentioned that the number of satellites going to orbit has exponentially increased. Since 2020 to 2024, if you look at it, it has gone up from 2,500 to almost 10,000, if I'm not wrong. The current numbers are. The space is now growing, but we don't have that fundamental infrastructure in place to monitor how these objects behave. So I think there is a need for a space domain awareness for the industry to thrive and grow. Having said, one of the key points that Krishna mentioned was there has always been data, but what to do with the data, the analytics is super important, which is rightfully, it's a very valid point. One of the key things that we have seen in the space domain awareness side is when you look at the space market itself, the insurance industry has been sort of growing, but the models on which they operate have been flawed because they follow the old, the assessment that they do follow the old space methodologies where they assess the risk of the system. So we at Digantara are building a whole new vertical on insurance where we utilize space domain awareness data that's out there to build meaningful analytics and risk models for underwriters to get a better sense about what is happening in orbit. So this is very crucial because this will help insurers underwrite satellites. If you look at the current market, only less than 1% of these satellites are insured. So we want to fill that gap that's currently out there, bring volume, ensure that everyone follows sustainable guidelines, operate in a more sustainable manner. So this is one of the verticals that we are actively building right now internally as well. So it's not just Indian companies collaborating, so to say, but it's more towards how can space domain awareness data enable the whole space ecosystem. That's the question that we ought to be answering right now.
Yeah. So my next question to Lieutenant Colonel Verma. How should I put it? So basically, the Indian industry per se is more, it's a hub for services. And then we are moving up to the value chain, and we are a solution, we are known for our solutions now. And then the products are there at the West because the market is more mature. So how do you see the collaborative partnerships, or how do you see the collaborations happening in the industry ecosystem between India and US? I hope I have made some sense out of my question.
Yeah, I'll pick up the keywords.
Yes.
Anyways, you said the collaborations and solutions and what should we look at. I'll simply put it, make something which the customer wants. Otherwise it will not sell. So when we talk about space situational awareness, I earlier highlighted there are two aspects. One is the government, other is the commercial aspect. So let's focus on the commercial because that is easy. We cannot challenge the governments. So in the commercial aspect, where the customer is looking at, customer is looking at what he has launched, the satellite, how is it working, how will it fare in its entire life, and how will I have the compliance in place. So that is some inputs which is looking from, like what he's saying, from the space situational awareness, I would say non-Earth imaging. So how do we get this? What can we make and how can we design it? So as far as the EOs are concerned, electro-optical sensors are concerned, we are looking at a SSD, that is a spatial distance, if I'm not wrong, sorry, SSD. For the EOs, if you've got something between 2.5 to 10 centimeters, it is the best. Only then you can actually characterize and mensurate the payload which you are looking at. So if you've got some sensors built at those resolutions, probably they will work better. Secondly, as we say, any technology which you build must be dual use. Otherwise, it is of no use in the market. It is not commercially viable. So similarly, when we are building our satellites or these sensors, they have to image the Earth as well as replicate the same process when they're not imaging towards the sky also, universe also. So electro-optical sensors at a very high resolution, yes, only then you can characterize. The predictability of your mensuration, the softwares or the systems which you have to build, yes, otherwise the compliance part you cannot take care of. And finally, coming on to the collaboration part, collaboration obviously will happen between the people who can define their systems to these standards which I'm talking about. Otherwise, if something more than 1 meter, just for the sake of it, if you're not able to identify the payload at that distance, the user will have no use of it. So that is something, an insight. We have to go to the specifics, what the user wants, what kind of a design he wants, and what is the commercial viability of it. That's how probably we can work out the commercial viability of the SSAs. And based upon these, the collaborations between the countries can happen.
For this insight. Krishna, do you have to say anything about it from a SATSUR perspective? Like India as a services, as a country, as a services, as a hub, as services industry, then the value chain moves up and we are solutions also. We start recognizing ourselves as solutions industry ecosystem. And then we are also moving towards products. So technology transfer, perhaps, or the products, how are we going to see that the products are getting manufactured here, or how are we going to, your observation on this.
So yeah, I think it was around like 5 years ago, I was writing some stories, and there was this one conversation I had with a space entrepreneur, and I asked him, why are you guys building rockets in India? Why not in the West or the Europe? He mentioned that you can build a rocket in India at 1/3 of the cost in the US. So the cost plays a huge role when it comes to space industry, because it's all about the, it's a lot about the cost, because at the end, the customer needs to have that much budget to acquire an image or a hardware. So India is slowly and gradually going towards a complete, full stack solution provider from just data, because up until now we were on the data processing side, even SATSUR. What we are doing right now is that we are also going towards producing those data from space. And when you enter space, there is no way you can just limit to India. You can't just limit to a particular country, because space in its own nature, the satellites will be revolving, capturing the entire Earth. And whenever it's capturing the entire Earth, stakeholders from any particular country, any corner of the world, will need those data, because at the end it's information. Information is vital to them as per their requirement. And as the information is important, what is also important is the acquisition cost. And if we think that defense has a lot of budget to acquire any particular image of any particular cost, let me tell you that in Europe, NATO has a huge issue when it comes to acquisition of data, because it's so costly that they are left with no option but to build their own set of constellation, which a certain country in European Union are doing among themselves to counter the escalating cost of image acquisition. So you see that every country in one or the other way, every continent is turning into a full stack solution provider. And India is on the advantage, like has the advantage because we have the expertise, the talent, the understanding, because being from a service-oriented, like background, the country which it has, it understands the nature of the data, the magnitude of data, and the infrastructure which it requires to process the data. All we need is to put satellites into the orbit from India. That is the last piece of the puzzle that we are moving towards.
Your thoughts on this?
I think one of the, adding on to what Krishna is saying, right? We have been asking the wrong question when it comes to India and US collaboration. A lot of people have been talking about transfer of technology from US to India and building it in India for a cheaper way. But you also have to see that there's a lot of innovation is happening in India. You have to either talk about the dialogue, the conversation should be about either using the innovation that is happening in India or working on a co-innovation model between India and US. I think that's where the value is. You see startups in India are working on really cutting edge technologies right now. That, I mean, when you compare it to the US, it's either complementary or is it something better than what's being built there. So there is a lot more value in looking at co-innovation or using the innovation that is being built in India to build it for the world.
I absolutely agree to what you have shared, but then innovations are important because we have a very robust startup ecosystem in India, so that's where the agility also comes in. But how will you then account for the scalability that is required, because you are actually not to just one country, but you are going to cater to the global demands. So so that's where perhaps, I mean, my submission was, that's where we are looking at bringing the technology, or you can always name it as, co-innovation or co-creating something. That is, I absolutely, I mean, agree to it. But then how are you going to take care of that?
I'll just take one example, which is not related to space sector, but semiconductor industry, right? Most of the semiconductor technology development, the design and is happening in back offices in India, where most of the Indians are working on this technology to build it for the world. Why don't we do it here in India? Take Digantara, for example. Now, although we are an Indian company, we are serving customers globally. So, I mean, transfer of technology can address the problem in near term, but if you're looking at a long-term development, it is important that we focus on innovation, R&D, than transfer of technology. As a country, if you want to build capability, if you want to harness the IP that's already here, scalability will come because the market is in our favor, where the cost to bring something to life is much, much cheaper, faster. So I think we have to focus more on innovation than transfer of technology.
So, Lieutenant Colonel Verma, I just also wanted to ask a very pertinent question, because we are looking at this transformation, and transformation is happening like, every 2 years, every 18 months, we have a transformation that is happening, and we are all trying to adapt ourselves to the ecosystem. So it is also important that we build a talent pool, we build our youth knowledge force, we make them relevant workforce. So what should be the role of the industry, and what are your thoughts?
Absolutely correct. Transformation, I would say in technology, the rate of obsolescence is too fast. By the time you bring up something, it is obsolete. Or by the time you are market viable, something else comes up. In fact, we have an experience in Maxar. If we are not thinking 10 years ahead, the competitors will take over. Today, we are virtually thinking, don't think about imaging. Think of something else. So that is there. But yes, India has got a lot of potential in that sense. We are talking of scales. If we keep on innovating, I believe India has everything to give in the geospatial and remote sensing thing. Because being on the equator with such a wide diversity of natural vegetation and terrain and everything, right from plains, seas to Himalayas, right from the agriculture sector to climate change to defense, everything is there. India is, I believe, the only country where maritime awareness to the Himalayan awareness is important from the defense perspective as well as the climate change also. So the Indian diaspora, the people from India, the demographic dividend, which I would say, they can actually catch up to it. Only thing is the government support. Yes, now this is happening. The collaborations, US IBC Forum is one of it. I would say it is really now getting the traction. Even we are also forced. I'm coming from a US, from one such delegation, and I would say that from my one personal experience, things are actually moving upon. So there's a lot of potential on this, and we have got a lot of potential in the form of our youngsters and the present policies which are going on. Maxar has been supporting a few startups also, and they are showing good results also. So in future also, there is nothing called niche right now. Yes, the technology is niche, but in a very few days, it becomes obsolete also. So there's a lot of scope. We can just go on innovating. There is no end to it. Somebody in the previous discussion, he was also saying that, you know, the word he used, I'm just forgetting it. But yes, the Indian startups, the support which they are getting from the government and the way they are innovating, it will come up to the standards which the industry actually wants. And yes, the collaborations, it is a mutual requirement of both. The kind of, I would not say that labor, but the technical expertise which we have and the potential which we have, this is what the other countries, like the European countries, actually want. So whatever niche which is costly in the beginning, we can actually give it at a very low rate. So that is, you know, the place where this can be done. Where mutually we can actually get onto it and reap the dividends of this technology and the niche.
Do you have any? Because I have one more question. That is the last question.
On the talent side?
No. Talent side, the question is, I mean, this is being addressed, this is being answered now. So if you want to respond to that question, otherwise I have one more question for all my panelists, and that will be my last question.
Okay, on the talent pool that we have in India, on that, right?
No. Talent pool question, you may like to answer. If
Okay.
you have any thought, you can also share your thoughts.
See, I would like to answer on that, because what is happening today is that, see, it's simple. Youngsters today are getting exposed to sci-fi movie more than ever before, right? And they are seeing companies like, like SpaceX and other people, and they're getting fascinated by it. And since they are being exposed to so much information about space technology and the capability and the fact that they also can be a part of it, they're getting motivated by that fact. And since they're getting motivated, there is a huge demand for that. And in India today, we just don't have one IST. We have multiple other private institutions giving courses. We have multiple organizations extending in particular provision for students to come on board and do some internship and all those things. We, companies like us and I think all three of us, we do the same thing. Like we have interns on board, not only because they have interest, because they also have the out-of-the-box thinking towards a certain problem, and that helps us to polish and make the youngsters prepared for the upcoming space revolution in India, as I would like to put it.
It's a wonderful initiative by the Indian companies, but we have so the challenge is of scale again, because we have to cater to the, the demographic dividend. We have to exploit on that. We have to exploit that. So Shreyas, your thoughts on that quickly, and then I'll have my last question.
I think we are getting there. We are slowly getting there. One of the key things is we are fortunate to have the support of the government. They have been very actively listening to us on what we want to do, and that's sort of reflected in the space policy as well. They are hearing to the stakeholders. They are taking their feedback. I think that's a great step. We have constant communication with them that allows us to point out what the bottlenecks are, and I think working hand in hand, I think that's where we can get to in terms of addressing the problem of scale. We do have some bottlenecks in terms of talent that's available, but it's just a matter of time. I think we will be there to serve the world.
Karlan Verma, so SSA is defined as a greenfield segment. Perhaps your recommendations, your thoughts, perhaps 2 or 3 bullets for the audience, for our stakeholders.
Okay, ma'am. Though I have covered everything, but just to give you a scope a little bit more in detail, why we should go for it. I'll leave aside the government sector because we're in a niche stage. Again, coming back to the commercial sector, I just mentioned about scales. Whenever a launch happens, The SSA, first of all, is operator specific, and it is a subset of the SDA, that is the Space Domain Awareness. SSA particularly is an event specific, I would say an operator specific. I will not name any, but tomorrow in case Suyesh launches a satellite, he'll be more concerned about in the 30 or 40 days, whether its antennas are open, whether it is tumbling or not, what is happening with the satellite till it is not stabilized. So this is the early life. He would require the SSA inputs on it. Secondly, in its midlife, how is the satellite being maneuvered? Are there any threats? Is there any vulnerability? Is there some small hit, some crisis over there? How to manage it? Such examples have already happened, and Maxar has provided support to other companies through these means also. Finally, as the LEO is getting trafficked, the compliance is also coming on heavy with the satellite operators. So when the compliance come on heavy, at the end of the satellite life, you need to deorbit it. How that process is happening? If there is any crisis, is there any mitigation plans? So from where do you get the inputs? NAI or SSA. Apart from it, if the satellite operator has insured himself, then for the insurance company to vet it, whether the satellite operator has done his job, is there any debris or not? Again, the SS. So this is just one part in the life of a satellite. How much scope is there? There is an entire scope for the NEI wing, that is the SSA. Coming on to the government sector, if we take this subset as in the overall gambit of the space domain awareness, if there is any launch from the adversary, what kind of payload he has talked upon, what he has sent away. Our government would like to have a look at it. Again, the SSA comes into role. Secondly, is there any adversary threat? They would like to map it. Yes. If there is any, okay, I'll just come back to one beautiful example. In the previous, we were talking about the Outer Space Treaty. So in the Outer Space Treaty, how it came about. I read somewhere it came about from the Cuban crisis, when the Russian and the American president thought that, oh yes, this is going to be dangerous. Nobody should plant an atomic bomb in this space. That's how the peaceful means came up. So I'm just comparing in similar means, the kind of traffic is going to happen at LEO and people trying to take advantage of this, there is a lot of disruption that has to happen in the SSA means. So probably some more compliance has to be brought in, the way we think out. As of now, it's a scope. There is a lot of scope, and just an example that how our entrepreneurs and people can actually work on open it.
I think Sir mentioned a very important point here. It's about accountability, right? We in the space situational awareness industry is exactly at the same point where EO was 20 years back. If you were to open Google Maps when it was initially launched, and if you zoomed in on any of the sensitive institutions, let's say Rashtrapati Bhavan, or even take to the matter of fact Indian Institute of Science, it would have been masked by a layer and you couldn't see what the building was. But today it's not the case, because EO data is democratized. We are truly undergoing a democratization of SSA data right now, and what that's going to make is it's going to make space more accountable. Now we have certain countries rendezvousing near to other object, using both kinetic and non-kinetic energy sources as a way to deter them from operating. So with private space SSA companies coming in and even other countries developing those capabilities, we are seeing democratization of the SSA data. People will be more accountable. We can actually see who's doing what. I think it's a great time to be in, and it's exciting to see how is this going to transform the space industry.
Krishna, over to you.
Yeah. So as I mentioned, right, SSA is a very vital part of the EO industry. I will just tell two things here. The first thing is that if you see over the course of years, surveying a particular land or a particular area of interest has gone from your drone to HAPS to particular satellite. And same as with the communication, we are going from terrestrial communication to SAT-based communication, right? And what do we see here is that we are slowly and gradually moving towards a land-based economy to an orbital-based economy. And since it is happening, if you see any particular institutions like a government institution, it's being fortified by a good number of armed forces because it's of a national interest and has a lot of importance. The same thing will be happening with satellites, because satellite is literally going to be the eye for Indian Army any particular Indian forces or any global forces, and also for the economy of the country, because like disaster management and all this thing. Those satellites will also need certain security, certain forces to like keep looks that it doesn't collide or it doesn't has any potential threat from the adversaries. That is one thing. And the second thing is that for the security forces or for the the satellites to be safe, it is because a lot of information is going to come from space, is going to come from those assets, from satellites. And to give a small analogy with the second part is that assume data is a passenger and satellites are the Ola and Uber of the world, right? And to make sure that data goes from one point to another point, the Ola or Uber needs to be properly moving smoothly on a particular road. And that for that to happen, the roads needs to be safe. For that, you need better rules, better traffic regulation. Same thing is going to happen in the space also. The assets, satellites needs to be secured so that data transfer happens seamlessly and the economy runs smoothly. And at the end, it's going to be a holistic approach. We need all those solutions from Digantara, from Maxar, and all those things to give the customer what he or she needs at the end of the day. That's all, yeah.
With this, we come to an end of this session. I thank all my distinguished panelists for this wonderful conversation. In fact, they gave the insights, and I think collaboration definitely is the mantra, but it is also very important that if space needs to be accountable, then so we will be, so we should be. With this, I'm just closing it because I do not have sort of any expressions to consolidate the summaries or the talking points that we discussed today. So recommendations can be given to USIBC team, and I would request USIBC team to continue this discussion over, over a webinar or something, because this is not going to be closed today. Yeah, thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
I'd like to thank all the panelists for a great session. So now, to our final session of the day. It's going to be a fireside chat on transitional traditional space. Can I call upon Wing Commander Satyam Kushwaha, the Director of ISPA, to please come on stage, along with Mr. Vikas Khitta, the VP and Head Corporate Office at L&T, and Dr. Samir Guduru from USIBC. A small announcement, post this session, we're going to have closing remarks by Consul General Christopher Hodges for about 10 minutes, and then we'll head up to the reception. Thank you.
So, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Last session of the day, isolated pockets of cerebral cells still at work, while some still busy networking. That's how generally all events are. So let's do some ideation with someone who's really been part of the ecosystem for a long period of time, and he, along with his ecosystem, L&T, has contributed significantly to developing the Indian space ecosystem right from its inception stage. If I may say that once ISRO started, I think you've been engaged with ISRO right from inception. And they have a huge demonstrated history of what nation building in space is all about. That's how I would term it. So, sir, if I may start with you. There's a lot of activity happening in space, a lot of events, a lot of seminars, a lot of reports coming in. But having been the man on the ground who has seen this ecosystem evolve from government control and now opening up, how do you see the growth of the space economy in India in the next 5 to 10 years?
Okay, so good evening and thank you USIBC for this opportunity. Just a small correction. I was not the man who was involved from ISRO's first rocket launch, or L&T was.
Yes, L&T.
I was born later. So, but
Right.
it is a fact that...
So I meant the ecosystem.
Right. So it is a fact that, yes, L&T has been involved right from India's first rocket launch and onwards. And my seniors tell me at a time when India did not even have scientific calculators. So calculations were done using slide rules. So that's all I can say on that front. Now, coming to your question, see, we are very bullish on the way the space economy is set to grow. Now, to take a step back, in 2022, the Indian space economy stood at something like $8.4 billion. And by 2033, it's expected to be in the range of $44 billion. So that's a CAGR of about 16%. And this I'm quoting from a slide that was presented earlier in the day by Dr. Vinod Kumar of InSpace. The upstream portion, which is currently about $1.3 billion, would be around 9.4 billion by 2033. And this transition will have about $22 billion of investment, mostly from the private sector. The overall $44 billion would comprise of about 25% of exports. And it's going to be the services, it'll be downstream-led growth, so downstream services. So when you look at the upstream portion, we do see not just this expansion from 1.3 billion or so to 9.4 odd billion in this period, but in tangible terms, what it would mean is development and setting up of manufacturing clusters, space parks. There will be space ports. There would be localization of components. So for instance, India lacks a composite manufacturing ecosystem. So the carbon fiber primarily comes out of Japan and then gets processed elsewhere and then India buys it at composites. Whereas our own civil aviation sector is also growing rapidly. So the composites will be useful both in space and in aviation. So that gives you, it gives you justification to consider setting up that as an industry itself in India. So composites by itself would be a very large spin-off benefit in manufacturing for the upstream part of the space economy. The other two areas that I can think of offhand would be electronics and sensor manufacturing. So, and you can already see sensors, there has been some movement on the ground. If you go by the media reports, there have been large investments have been announced in chip manufacturing, which also includes sensors, and also in electronics. So that's the other part. What it would also do is, at this moment, I'm mostly seeing a very young and vibrant Indian audience, the Indian part of the audience, but I do see a few people closer to my age group. So I'll take you back to the time when India had its auto revolution, when you had the Japanese vehicles coming into India. So it was not just the vehicle that came into India, you had mushrooming of various industries. So there was the mechanical parts, then there was the plastics, and then there was the rubber industry, the hydraulics, and so on and so forth. So it's going to take a similar path. And then what all this does is, when you have these manufacturing clusters in the various disciplines coming up, it also adds resilience to the global supply chain. So the developed economies would need reliable partners. So, it sort of feeds into itself and makes the entire model more robust. So, in short, we see the outlook as extremely bullish. We see this actually happening on the ground. And therefore, as L&T, we are also quite aggressive about it. But then, since we're a conservative company, so we, we don't exactly go around advertising things. So have I answered your question?
Yes. Yeah. So, very interesting comments on India playing an important role in the global supply chain in times to come. If I was to ask you, what would be the key enablers for India to put into place so that we can, have a more definitive growth path in the manner in which you listed those sectors, and importantly, how do we become an alternate to, say, some of our key players like China in being the important players in the supply chain ecosystem in the world. So I would like to see it both from a component side as well as, say, big items like satellites and rockets. So if we were to look at both the sides, how do you see, what are the enablers to make that happen?
Okay, so firstly, we are not doing this in competition with anybody else, right? So we are doing this for the development of the Indian ecosystem. We are doing this for the development of like-minded countries. So we are not in competition with anyone else. So that's the first thing. Now coming to, so the space ecosystem as it stands today on the ground. So you have a collection of, you have government agencies, then you have primes, then you have a very vibrant and relatively young startup ecosystem. So the primes and primes are mostly in the private sector. So the primes and the startups will require a certainty of business and continuity of orders. So without that, so what does a startup need? It needs capital and it needs orders, right? So that has to firstly be done. Now, in order to do that, you need complete clarity and let's say stability on the space law, the Space Activities Bill. Then there have been movements on the FDI policy. There are cases of some aberrations in our GST structure. There's inversions in some cases. Now these are anecdotal things, but they need to be corrected because they have the tendency to lock up capital. Industry will need to invest more in research and development. So you heard Dr. Somnath, he said, he was looking at me and he says, a lot of infrastructure development is taking place and so on and so forth, but not in the space ecosystem, right? So but there are those sentiments also, and they have to be taken and factored in and acted upon. So, so that's one side of the story. Then there are, so incentives for R&D is also going to be an industry demand going forward. Then there will be the financial side. So you will need a financing ecosystem. You will need an insurance ecosystem. So, there will have to be a system of sovereign guarantees. There will have to be a system of going down to the tiered thing. Our own procurement policies, so as was alluded to by an earlier speaker in the day, so the government is both a competitor, a regulator, and the customer. So in a situation like that, there needs to be a very strong quality cum cost-based selection system for procurement. And there are thoughts about PPP-like models. I won't say PPP, but PPP-like models for manufacturing, but that needs to be extended also to design. So you will have situations where people will say, okay, we are a startup, but we will restrict ourselves to design and we will not like to get into manufacturing. For manufacturing, we have a partnership or a collaboration with somebody. So it could be a consortium. So you will need to keep that flexibility that there can be a collaboration on design and there can be a collaboration for design and manufacturing or solely for manufacturing. So three different things. So one will need to. Then coming to certain other softer aspects, we do not have Indian space standards. So that standard development is going to be a big area, and that's going to take some time and some doing, and it needs, standards are not easily set, right? And the way the world is now moving forward, standards will have to ensure that the products and services are interoperable. So that's another aspect, right? Especially when it comes to things like communication and all. So gone are the days when your various electronic devices could not speak to each other because they followed different protocols. You can't do that now, right? So then there will be a requirement of test facilities to be created in the countries. Currently, InSpace and ISRO are championing it, but as we go ahead, as we go down the road, I'm sure there will be private sector interest and willingness to get into that area as well. So that's yet another area which I foresee as areas opening up in opportunities for industry. And of course, when I'm saying this on the strength of an FDI policy which has already been announced. So it's not just there for Indian companies. So there are areas where foreign players also can come and invest in those sectors. So largely, that is where we see things. Now, coming to what would actually happen, yeah, I mean, clearly the writing is on the wall. India will need to move towards RLVs, reusable launch vehicles. We will need to move into next generation launch vehicles, which would potentially employ semi-cryo engines. So the technology for semi-cryo engines, the manufacturing, the design, everything, that entire ecosystem will also need to be set up. So, we're talking about actually, we have an industry which is at a nascent stage. We're talking about creation into a much larger, a proper industry, the way we have other sectors in the country, other manufacturing sectors. And of course, the applications we all know in both the civil and the military domains. Two crucial aspects will be access to academia, so industry-academia collaboration. So now that needs to be, it needs to be reciprocal. So Indian industry should be able to access US universities and vice versa. So both ways. That really helps.
In fact, you touched a very important point because industry academia collaboration makes the foundational, canvas for any good industrial capability to build up. And since we are in a US IBC event, can I just ask you to further elaborate on how do you see the academia industry engagement between both the countries to developing, given the increased relationship, the better strategic engagement that is happening between both the countries, given a common strategic interest?
No, I'll have to be diplomatically correct on this one. I think there is intent, but in real terms, I am not very sure if that access is there today, right? I mean, there are exceptions to the rule. I am one, though not from US, mostly Europe. But this needs to be institutionalized and done on the ground, because at the end of the day, the benefits will be shared. I mean, the initial parts of the benefit may appear to be more to the Indian side, but as we go down the road, the benefits would be larger to both the developed economies and other developing economies, right? So it will be, I mean, that's the way I see it. Maybe it's not been articulated enough, or it's not, I don't know if the point has ever come up in the past.
Dr. Samir, would you also like to add your comments on this question? And how do you see it? Because you work closely with the US side also. So how are you seeing the messages from their side, and how do we really do something credible so that it's not about talks but actionable outcomes, and keeping in mind the US regulatory frameworks that come into play? They have their concerns, but we also need to grow. So how do you balance this vis-a-vis the academia industry collaboration?
To be very honest with you, I think Mr. Kita, after expounding his wisdom, it's so much more easier for me to just sit as a person in the audience rather than speak. I mean, he has years of experience and has brought it out today. So as far as this particular question is concerned, I really think there needs to be access to private sector funding, firstly for Indian innovation ecosystem to develop further. That I think is a critical aspect to anything that we do going forward when it comes to any sort of deep tech. I'm not restrict my comments only to space sector. This is the case with aerospace, defense, you name it, every sector. That unfortunately is not happening. I mean, I come from an academia background myself, with a doctorate in physics, and I kind of understand how easy it is in the Western countries to accelerate and develop a product through R&D, through design and things like that. But that's not strictly the case here in India. Although that is sort of picking up, but there needs to be a lot more investment, not only through the public sector, but also through companies like L&T and major private sector entities like Lockheed Martin or Boeing or any other companies to invest in R&D and work closely with educational and institutions like the IITs. So for example, in the US specifically, you have institutions like the USRA, Universities Student Research Association, that work very closely with industry, and that makes innovation easier and accelerate things towards development of products, and that's how you create an ecosystem. And that unfortunately is missing. I think it's picking up, but it's a long, long way to go.
So on that note, how do you see the emerging startups competing with the traditional space companies in India, and how do you see this value emerging out of this whole ecosystem?
At USIBC, we have launched several initiatives apart from the launch of ISET last year in January in 2023 at the US Chamber. Under ISET, there are various other initiatives, including the IndusX initiative. You also were there the other day. We organized the second iteration of that in Delhi in February. So the idea is to generate discussions and understand what exactly needs to be done on ground, not only at the G2G level, but also at the G2B level and as well as at the B2B level, to understand what are the concerns. For example, you have raised this issue of export controls and restrictions. So half of the folks at events like IndusX representing startups have no clue on what export controls are or how to navigate them. As an industry body, we have been advocating to, sort of make things easier for the industry and the startup ecosystem by doing a lot of events, including webinars. Just a couple of days ago, for example, we hosted someone from the Department of Commerce to discuss exactly EAR export controls. So these sort of discussions have just begun. So you can imagine how long it's going to take to percolate down to the general crowd as well as the industry ecosystem itself. That's how you initiate a meaningful discussion. Then naturally, of course, you keep representing your points with the government on both sides to facilitate ease of doing business and things like that. So that's the only way forward. Have events like this, sit down and discuss and exactly address what are the issues and the challenges for businesses.
So during a lot of my discussions with from various departments from the US side, we have been kind of talking about how can we make the US export control laws and ITAR issues more easy and simplified to understand, including because what's happening is that India is becoming a powerhouse of innovation. Morning, Dr. Vinod gave out some good statistics about how the number of companies that are growing and that the space is picking up, right? Challenges happen that I set up a company today based on technology, which has a certain chip, and tomorrow it gets sanctioned. Now my whole company, everything ecosystem comes crashing down. So this is a big risk which many of the Indian startups are fearful about. I mean, they may not speak publicly, but they do communicate to us. And in case we really need to be strategic partners to work closely for our common global interests, or at least our strategic interests, then there needs to be something done where such fears are kind of addressed. The second aspect that comes into play is that because the communication about these regulatory aspects and the frequent changes are not well communicated within the Indian ecosystem. Imagine a youngster sitting in a tier 2 city developing a technology, and tomorrow somebody suddenly putting him in a blacklist because he's violated some law. So these are important things which need to be addressed in case we need to bring both ecosystems together. While we have been working very closely from ISPA side to engage with all whom we come across, but I think, would you like to comment on this?
I actually defer it to Jay. He's our executive director.
Sure.
I'm sure he'll be able to provide a better.
Can we have a mic for Jay?
There's a bit of a gap here, because if we're talking about U.S. export controls, and we've had some sessions, and it's significantly easier. The U.S. partner does most of the work. Most of commercial SATCOM is exempt for India, not all countries. So that piece we're starting to solve, and it's a bit of awareness, and it's a bit of reform. But what I hear talking in almost all of today is how does India develop its own ecosystem, its own technology, and how do they then export that, just to be specific. So now we're talking about Indian export controls and the SCOMET. I didn't hear that mentioned today at all.
So I was about to come to that side too in this discussion.
So thank you. So maybe for you in the final question would be to talk a little bit about Indian export controls. Is that easy? Because that's the piece that the Indian entrepreneurs are going to need to handle. If they're buying or importing, their American partners are going to do it. So what would you tell to the American companies here that want to buy Indian tech, and how easy or hard is India's export control regime? Thank you.
I'll make one small comment and then I'll give it to Vikas sir for taking it further. As far as India is concerned, Jay, a lot of efforts are being put by our Ministry of External Affairs and DG. There's a lot of effort being made towards spreading the awareness on the SCOMET list as a start point. So we recently had, in I think the month of January, a major event where the entire industry was called, and we on our own have been communicating the aspects of SCOMET list. Definitely, India is kind of moving from a central government-controlled ecosystem where the technology or the cutting-edge technology used to be made in the government ecosystems, and that is how so automatically sovereign had the control there. But now with increased Make in India effort happening and technology being developed in the sensitive technology being developed in the private sector, obviously there has to be a concern that this technology that is developed is rightfully used and there is a proper end use to that. Sir, Vikas sir, here I would like to ask you that you yourself, I mean your L&T has been into handling a lot of such sensitive technologies. What would be your views as to how we should steer our regulatory ecosystem to ensure that our technologies remain in the right hands and we are also able to meet, say, the global expectations on export control?
So this is the day for difficult questions. Huh? And may I remind you, happy hour is waiting. Okay, so the thing is, see, partnerships need to be handled differently from regular businesses. Now, and this is true for all strategic areas. So it could be space, it could be defense, it could be several more. And frankly, from a boardroom perspective, when one draws up a business plan, one is taking into account that you will have cross-border transactions, and obviously those will be with like-minded countries, both developed and developing countries. So and clearly there is political intent on both sides. I think, and I think it's a fair point to also say that we've had more conferences than business transactions. So I think institutions like USIBC could play that very vital role in bridging that gap and have conversations with both sides. So when you have partnerships, you actually need to have a very different way of doing business. So export control is the very opposite of partnership, number one. And partnership, in a sense, also implies reciprocal procurement arrangements. Otherwise, what is the partnership?
Absolutely.
Right? So unless we get to that stage, and there I think USIBC can play a stellar role in bridging that. And if you really want to develop economies, countries, and there is that portion called collectively referred to as Global South, many of them are expectantly waiting. See, this partnership between India and US is being watched by many countries. And there's great expectation. And the Indian, let's say, enthusiasm in the semiconductor space has also been watched by a lot of players in the world. So all this is leading up to a sense of expectation everywhere. And so if this combine is not able to get there first and meet those expectations first, somebody else will. So we simply have to get our act together. That's all I can say.
Thank you so much, sir. That was a difficult one and you answered it well. Thank you so much. Do we have, okay. So I'm told that we don't have further time, so we need to end it. I thank both my panelists for their wonderful participation and thank you for being such a patient audience.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Now I request Consul General from Chennai, Mr. Christopher Hodges, to deliver the closing remarks.
Good evening, everyone. Doing a pulse check. Good evening, everyone. I know Carrie's engaged. So it's a real pleasure to be here with you at the end of what I know was a very fruitful and productive day, and one that coincides with Ambassador Garcetti's first trip to Bangalore. And I can't think of a better occasion to have the ambassador here in Bengaluru, to have him here with all of you, than to discuss commercial space and the possibilities and the potential. We have been looking to get him here for quite a while. Scheduling demons and other things insisted on intervening a couple of times, but it's been a fantastic day for him, and wonderful to see him on the days with Chairman Somanath to discuss the way ahead on commercial space. Before I get into some closing remarks that I hope pulls together some of the strands from today's discussion and looks ahead at what we do next, which is always what, hopefully we're thinking at a closing session or ceremony, I do want to give some context on what brought us here today. First of all, I want to thank our partners at the U.S. India Business Council, Alex and Jay and others, for being such wonderful partners to put together this symposium. But this is the result and the outgrowth of a collaboration between the U.S. and India on commercial space, a joint sub-working group, which is a language that only people that work for a government really speak. But I'll tell you what a joint sub-working group can do is really meaningful and really important. And since the formation of this group only 4 or 5 months ago, we have seen some major advances and that demonstrate the real commitment of both sides to figuring out and advancing and solidifying not just what we do in space together, and the ambassador and the chairman, I think, both characterized that beautifully this afternoon, but what we do on the commercial space element, which is essential. I mean, I think NASA learned this in the 1970s and 80s and into the 90s. Even, if space travel and exploration is something that excites the hearts and minds and emotions of the people in a country that is pursuing it, the government still cannot do that alone. It requires everyone in that country and partners in other countries to come together across the spectrum to make our space cooperation, our space exploration meaningful. And that's what all of you in the room today, I know, are helping to do and will continue to help to do. But we have had in the last 4 months this symposium plus a working group, an exchange visit to the US with colleagues from ISRO and other members of the space community, I will generally term them, to really look at the role that commercial space can play. So by any standard, but particularly by the standards of these sorts of organizations, we are moving remarkably quickly, and I think it really illustrates the commitment, the energy, and the determination of both the United States and India to do this together and to get it right, and to build the framework that allows all of the innovation that you are pioneering and advancing to grow. I think commercial space and space exploration is particularly interesting under the ICET framework, and the ambassador talked about ICET a little bit this afternoon, the Initiative for Critical and Emerging Technology. This is about 2 years old. It includes artificial intelligence, it includes green technology, it includes semiconductors, it includes telecommunications, 5G, 6G, and other things. But the interesting thing for me is that space cooperation and commercial space cooperation is a canvas where all of these different technologies can come together to produce real and unique and meaningful results. So for all of the startups and members of the business community who are looking for that use case for their AI model, or looking for a different and innovative way to apply green technology and renewables, space exploration provides that opportunity, really, by being a place where all of these technologies can converge. And I think as we look at convergence and we look at connection, what I have heard from my participation today, and I haven't been at every session, but I've had colleagues slash moles who have filled me in on what I had to miss. The theme is really connection. So as we go forward together, I want to share a couple of quick thoughts about how we connect most effectively. I think the first way that we connect is just what I said, which is not looking at these next generation technologies as separate, horses on a racetrack and saying, well, AI is in the lead, but, quantum is catching up, and here comes 5G, 6G. I mean, there's a tendency, I think a human tendency, to view these things as separate pursuits. But in fact, if we're going to be successful, it really is going to be through connecting all of these technologies in ways that are meaningful, in ways that help to solve problems, in ways that help to identify new resources. Space exploration and commercial space exploration is a key venue for us to do that, because it is your companies, it is your partners, it is your businesses that are working on these issues, that are connected to other critical and emerging technologies, and that have the resources to incubate, support, and partner with others to get this done. And that takes me to a second way that I think we can all connect, which is connecting up and down business, connecting with higher education, with academia. I still think when we talk about connection, and I'm a government official, so if you want to tell me I'm wrong, please do so privately after I finish my remarks, but I'll take it. But my feeling is that we are still looking at these things in very rigid terms. We're still looking at connection and cooperation as business working with higher education, right? Or startups working together with students, maybe, right? But if we're going to do this, if we're really going to meaningfully connect, we have to have the big Fortune 500 multinational corporations helping the mid-caps, incubating the startups, providing money to help them build out their use case, providing money to take these things to market. I know that no business has unlimited resources, and every business has a bottom line, and I get that. Your goal is to make money, not to philanthropically advance human cooperation. Maybe that's my job, kind of, on a good day. But what we can do is pool our resources together, and there are resources at the government level. There are resources in the business community. Let's be creative about how we pull all of those resources together. Let's be ecumenical. Let's be generous in how we do that, because going back to your bottom line, the bottom line of any business involved in this sector, this will benefit your bottom line down the road. This is one of those investments that will pay off for everyone, including you, in the medium to long term. And maybe, not so much the medium term, maybe even sooner. So we need to think about how we're connecting all of these things together meaningfully. The other thing that we need to do is figure out how we're connecting to every member of our workforce. I'm looking out at the audience. The lighting is fighting me, but I still see about 85% men. Let's say 75% men. It's definitely a majority. Listen, if we're going to do this effectively, we need to bring all of the talent we have to bear together. And yeah, that represents our values as pluralist democracies in India and the US. That's important. But it also strategically is necessary if we're going to succeed, because you can't win this contest with one hand tied behind your back. You cannot do it. And so we all need to be thinking about, as we move forward together in commercial space, how we identify talent, not just hire it. I think the hiring is okay, but retain the talent. Make sure that all of that talent has an equal chance to get to the boardroom, the C-suite. That's really, really essential if we're going to be successful. So connecting these things creatively is important. Governments can help. Governments can't do it all. Governments can build ecosystems. Governments are not completely responsible for the ecosystems. That has to also come from the people who live within the house that the ecosystem creates. So I encourage all of you to think creatively about connecting in ways that you haven't before. Get out of your ruts, get out of your usual ways of doing business. If we're going to be successful in space cooperation and commercial space, we need to be wider. And so the last way we can connect, and I hope all of you do this meaningfully as you leave the hall this afternoon and move ahead, connect with each other. The most valuable element of all of these sorts of gatherings is the fireside chats and the guests of honor and the closing and opening remarks are great. But it's about who you meet at the coffee stand. It's about who you meet at your table. It's about who you follow up with a couple weeks later, a month later. It's about someone who helps you see this in a different way. I'm going to knock this left microphone right off the podium. I'm going to move my hand down. It's about someone who helps you see something in a different way. So what does that mean? That means, first of all, you have to be open to it. You have to be open to being wrong or incomplete in your thinking and ready to evolve your thinking. And you have to be open and committed to doing the work to maintain the relationship. And I think all of you have taken a really critical first step by being here, participating in this wonderful symposium that USIBC has organized. I encourage you to keep going. This is a really, really exciting time. And if we're going to be successful in any of these next generation technologies, but particularly commercial space, it's about blending different paints together the same way an artist does on a canvas. It's about blending different chemicals together the same way a scientist does in a lab. And you never know where that's going to go. You never know where that's going to take you. But we all have to be committed to doing this together. Because it's definitely going to turn out okay. It's going to be fine. It's even going to be good. But there is so much potential in this relationship and this partnership at this moment. The momentum here is something we cannot forsake. And I ask all of you to think about, to revisit this in a couple of weeks. What did I get out of that symposium and what am I doing with it? Because we'll need to do that together if we're going to be successful. I appreciate the chance to speak with all of you. I appreciate the chance to participate. And it's wonderful again to have such a great partner in the USIBC and others to pull this together. Thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your evening.
I promise to be super short. I also promise that there's some long, tall drinks out there in a moment. And I also promise the more we clap, the quicker we could get through this. I want to thank my team, Samir, if you could raise your hand, Aditya, if you could raise your hand. Shruti's not here. I see Debbie and Zolfia. We could have done that without Carrie, Arun. I see Manju. I want to thank Rose for coming all the way to the United States. Having you here was tremendous. I want to thank you, CG Hodges, Chris. Your entire team is fabulous. I want to thank the speakers, right? The IVLP panel, the geospatial panel, the SATCOM panel, the women's panel. I want to thank you guys, really appreciate it. The food was phenomenal as well. And now the last thing I will say is thank you all for being here, and let's go do some business over a drink.